Hello and welcome back to Grave Whispers. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I love reading every single one. If you enjoy drifting into dark, chilling tales whispered straight from the grave, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now get comfortable. Dim the lights if you dare. Relax your mind. Let the outside world fade away. And let's begin. Story 1. Struggling. I dragged it through to the garage. My arms were shaking by the time I got it over the threshold. The weight wasn't just physical. It felt like the whole house was watching me do it. Like the walls knew exactly what I was carrying and were holding their breath. My phone rang while I was pulling the door shut. My brother. Of course it was my brother. He always called when he needed reassurance, when he needed someone else to say the words so he could pretend he believed them. I answered, already tired. He didn't waste time with greetings. Are we really doing this? This has to be done, I said. You will be fine. I promise. He started to say something else, but I couldn't listen to him circle the same fear again. I hung up before he could finish. It felt cruel, but kindness wasn't what kept us alive. I turned the engine over. The car coughed, then caught. The sound filled the garage, thick and oily. The familiar feelings in my chest began to rot again the way they always did when the work started, like relief turning to nausea, like dread turning into focus. I moved to the back and shoved it into the trunk. It hit the metal with a dull thump. I slammed the lid down hard enough to rattle the hinges. Then I pulled out into the dark with the stereo already on. I needed noise. I needed something loud enough to drown out thinking. The moon was high, white and hard above the roofs. My brother was waiting at the corner like we'd arranged, a slim shape under a streetlight that flickered like it was exhausted. He was nervous, pacing in small circles. He started moving toward me before the car even fully stopped. When he opened the passenger door and got in, I saw it on his face immediately. It was carved there. He looked older than he was, like the fear had been living in him for years and finally decided to show itself. His eyes flicked toward the trunk, then away. "Do we have to?" he asked. I didn't answer right away. I let the music bleed through the speakers and fill the space between us. Outside, the city's lights stretched in every direction, bright enough to make you forget there was darkness beyond them. Look around, I told him. This city, this place, how do you think we've survived? He swallowed and stared ahead through the windshield, pretending he didn't understand what I meant. His hands were clenched in his lap like he was holding himself together. This is what we do, I said. The highway opened up in front of us, smooth and black, like a ribbon pulled through the night. The engine's steady growl vibrated through my bones. The familiar hum of speed settled into my body like a drug. I coughed once and turned my head slightly so he wouldn't see my mouth. He did anyway. His eyes narrowed. "What? Our fathers," I said, coughing again. It was getting harder to hide it. Outside the windshield, the city's neon veins pulsed and bent with motion. I pressed the gas a little more. The lights stretched into blurred lines like a comet tail dragging behind us. My brother shifted in his seat. "You never knew Father. He died when—" "He did not die," I said. The words came out colder than I meant, but I couldn't soften them. Not anymore. We surged forward, faster, the speakers louder. The city started to look like it was smiling, like the buildings were leaning in to watch us go. The sound of the music filled the car until it felt like we were floating inside it. For a while we didn't talk. We just drove. Then the music faded for a second and a voice cut clean through the speakers. Clear, close. As if someone was sitting in the back seat, speaking directly into our ears. Tomas. My hands tightened on the wheel. My brother turned his head sharply. Did you hear that? I switched stations immediately. The static popped. Then another song slammed in. Hear what? I asked, forcing my voice to stay casual. Your name, he said. I didn't hear anything. It was a lie, and we both knew it. We weaved through traffic. A couple of cars honked as I cut between lanes. My brother grabbed the door handle like it could keep him from being thrown out of the world. Then he saw the lights behind us, red and blue, distant at first, then closing. Tomas, he cried. Police! Slow down! I didn't. They knew what was inside. They always knew. They didn't need to see the trunk. They didn't need evidence. They could smell it the same way dogs can smell fear. You'll be forgiven, I said. My brother blinked. What? Soon, I told him. You'll see what you stand to gain. He stared at me like I'd started speaking another language. Tomas, he said again, softer this time, like a warning. Quiet, I said. We listen now. I turned the music up until it shook the dashboard. That's when the knocking started. At first it was faint, like shifting weight. Then it became clear, kicks, hard and frantic, slamming against the trunk from the inside. The struggle turned violent. The pleading became louder, more desperate, like whatever was trapped back there understood exactly where we were going. My brother made a sound like he was going to be sick. We crossed the river. The city began to thin out ahead of us. The lights grew fewer. The buildings spread apart. The road got darker. The engine suddenly sputtered. Then it died. The steering went heavy in my hands. The car rolled on momentum for a moment before I guided it to the shoulder. Shit, I muttered. My brother's voice came out tight. What? It's fine, I said automatically. I stepped out into the night and the desert's hot breath met my face. Even in the dark, you could feel it. Dry heat rising off the ground like the earth was still holding the day inside it. I popped the hood. I leaned over the engine like I was inspecting something. I pretended. I knew nothing was wrong. Not really. Behind me, another sound came from the trunk. A muffled cry. A desperate scrape. The same kind of sound I'd heard too many times before. It always got worse when we stopped. I shut the hood without fixing anything and walked toward the back of the car. Another cough hit me, deeper this time, and I tasted copper. I swallowed it down, but my throat still burned. Shut your fucking mouth, I muttered. Not sure if I was talking to the thing in the trunk or the thing inside me. I went back to the driver's seat. My brother was staring at me with wide eyes. I got in, turned the key. The engine started instantly, smooth, obedient, as if it had never failed at all. My brother flinched at the sound. We pulled back onto the road, dust rising behind us. The last of the city lights fell away until there was nothing but darkness and the thin white line ahead. I could feel it now. We were getting close. My brother shifted restlessly. Why are we... Just know that if you hide, it doesn't go away, I said. Another cough. This time blood came up, warm and thick. I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand and kept my eyes on the road. Don't end up stranded, Pablo. Do your duty to Our Lady. He stared out into the dark like he was trying to see the words instead of hear them. The desert stretched ahead, stone and sand laid out like it had been arranged on purpose. You leave it there, I told him, in her arms. He swallowed hard. There? They're harder to find now, I said. It won't be easy. Tomas, You leave them in her arms, I repeated. You cannot hide. It will not go away. I coughed again, and more blood came. My chest ached like something inside was tearing loose. Father, I said, voice rough. His father, and the one before. Pablo's hands were shaking. He pressed them against his thighs like he could stop it. We drove deeper into the night until the outline of the mission rose ahead of us, dark against the sky. It looked like it had been carved out of the earth rather than built. Old stone, boarded windows, a bell tower like a broken tooth. The radio crackled. Then it called my name again, soft and intimate, sliding through the music like it belonged there. Tomas. The pounding in the trunk rose with it, matching it like the thing back there was answering. We arrived and rolled to a stop in the dirt. Up close, the mission looked abandoned, hollow. It might have been a refuge once, a place people ran to when the world got cruel. Now it felt like something else. Or maybe it always had been, and people just called it holy because they didn't know what else to call a place that demanded offerings. You know it may hide, I told my brother, but it never goes away. Blood came before the cough this time. It splattered onto the dash in dark drops. My vision blurred for a second, and I had to blink hard to clear it. Pablo stared at the blood, then at me. His voice cracked. Tomas, don't leave me out here. Tomas. You'll be fine, I told him, though I didn't know if it was true. Just make sure you get the right one. You will know. Another cough cut me off. More blood. Put it in her arms, I said. She'll be waiting. At the altar, do not speak to her, even if she speaks to you. Tom, kiss her feet, I continued. Never turn your back. He opened his mouth again, but I kept going because if I stopped, I might not start again. Always be done before. The cough tore through me. Blood sprayed across the wheel in my hand. Sunrise. I pushed the door open and stepped out. The night air hit me like a wall. I felt dizzy. My legs felt wrong under me, like they belonged to someone who'd already started dying. I walked to the trunk and stood there for a moment, listening. It was fighting hard now. Kicking, crying, scratching at the metal. It knew. Whatever we bring out here, it always knows. I wiped the blood from my mouth and smiled, but the expression didn't feel like mine anymore. I opened the trunk. It thrashed immediately, a tangle of limbs and terror. It fought harder than most as I pulled it free, twisting and kicking while I dragged it out. Its dress caught on the latch for a moment, and I yanked until fabric tore with a harsh rip. Pablo was behind me now, crying openly. His shoulders shook. He looked like a child being forced to watch something he couldn't understand. I tossed him the keys. Go, I told him. Next time, don't come back empty. He reached toward me like he wanted to grab my arm. Leave, I said. He hesitated, then got into the car like his body was moving on orders his mind hadn't agreed to. The engine started. The headlights swung. Then he was gone, dust swallowing the sound of him. The sky at the horizon was starting to change. Not full light yet, but a thin gray line pushing up, warning that night was almost over. I turned toward the mission. Inside the chapel was dark, but the candles were already lit. That was unusual. They were never lit when I arrived. Not unless she was expecting me. The flame light wavered across the walls, making the old painted saints look like they were breathing. I dragged the offering down the aisle. My footsteps sounded too loud. The air smelled like wax and stone and something older underneath. Something that didn't belong in a church. I approached the altar. She wasn't there. Not at first. I didn't hesitate. I laid the offering down at the base of the altar, where her arms were supposed to be, where I had seen her shadow so many times. It tried to run. I struck it once. Hard. It went still. I bowed. I pressed my lips to the marble where she normally stood. The stone was smooth and cold, bright even in low light, as if hands had polished it for centuries. I could still see her in my mind, tall and quiet, waiting with her arms open, a shape made of devotion and hunger. I stood up and stepped backward, careful, as I always was, never turning my back, never giving the air behind me an opening. I felt disappointed, and the feeling surprised me. I wanted to see her one last time. I wanted proof that all of this still meant something, that the sickness in my lungs was leading to something other than emptiness. The candles trembled. There was no wind, no breeze, no open windows. Still, the flames shook like they were afraid. And then, from somewhere close, too close, like a mouth near my ear, I heard it. Thomas, Story 2. I worked in the building on Harrison Avenue for 4 of those 8 years. It was 10 floors with around 70 tenants, a parking garage in the basement, and a coffee shop on the first floor. The coffee shop closed at 8 every night, and after it shut down the hallway, would keep that burnt milk smell until morning. After enough time, you stopped noticing it, the way you stopped noticing the sound of a fan in your own apartment. I knew that building the way you know your own place in the dark. I knew which floor tiles clicked when you stepped on them. I knew which doors stuck in the winter and which ones swung open too fast. Even the elevators had their own quirks. The third elevator from the left always took a beat before the doors opened, like it was thinking about it and deciding whether it really wanted to. Most nights were simple, quiet, just rounds, checking doors, checking stairwells, making sure nobody was sleeping in the wrong place or trying to break into an office after hours. You see a lot when you work security. Most of it is boring. Some of it is sad. A drunk person who can't find their car. Someone crying in the stairwell after a breakup call. People who work too late and forget what time it is. And then there are the nights that don't fit into any normal category. The 6th floor started being a problem in March. The company that used to be there was some kind of mid-size insurance group. I didn't know details, just that they had a lot of staff and always seemed tense. Then one Friday they were all there, maybe 40 people, maybe more. On Monday morning I came in and went up for my routine check, and the entire floor was just gone. Not like a slow move where boxes show up one week and desks disappear the next. Not like a renovation where people tape plastic sheets up and leave signs. It was like somebody erased them over a weekend. The weird part was the furniture. They left so much behind. Desks lined up in rows, rolling chairs pushed halfway in, a couple of metal filing cabinets, a coffee machine in what used to be a break area. It looked like a place where people were still supposed to work, only nobody was there to make any sound. For a while I told myself it wasn't strange. Companies do quick exits. People get laid off. Sometimes things happen fast. But even if the move made sense on paper, the floor didn't feel normal after that. When you walked out of the stairwell onto 6th, the air felt different. Stale, dusty, like the vents weren't being used the same way. The overhead lights stayed off most of the time, unless maintenance had to go up there. It was darker than the other floors, not because the lights didn't work, but because nobody cared enough to keep them on. There was also a sound, a low hum that seemed to come from the ventilation system. At first I assumed it was the air conditioning from a floor below, or maybe a machine room somewhere behind a wall. It wasn't loud. It didn't change pitch. It was just there, steady and calm, like an engine idling. After a few months, I stopped paying attention to it. My rounds were always the same. I would take the stairs, open the stairwell door, step out, sweep the corridor with my flashlight, and move on. It was mostly a formality. Nobody was supposed to be up there. Nobody had any reason to be up there. The 6th floor had basically turned into a dead space in the middle of a building that still had life above and below it. Then, in early September, something changed. It was 2:47 in the morning when I saw light under the door to office 612. I remember the time because I wrote it down. I was halfway down the corridor on 6, moving slow like I always did, flashlight angled toward the carpet and the door handles. At the far end, under a door marked 612, there was a thin strip of warm yellow light, just bright enough to show the edge of the door frame. It wasn't the emergency lighting. The emergency lights in this building have a green tint and are set into ceiling fixtures, so they wash the hallway in a dull glow. This was different. This looked like regular office lighting, the kind you would leave on if you were working late at a desk with a pile of papers. I stopped about 50 feet away and just stood there. The hallway was silent, except for that same low ventilation hum. No typing, no footsteps, no voices, no music from a phone, nothing that would explain why a light was on behind that door at nearly 3 in the morning. I started moving again, slow and careful. My hand went to the handle. I turned it and pushed the door open. The office was empty. The overhead light was on at full brightness, making the room look too clean and too exposed. It was a small office, a desk against the window, 2 chairs facing it, and a metal filing cabinet along the left wall. The blinds were down, so the dark outside couldn't get in. Everything looked like it had looked for months. No boxes, no jackets, no trash, no signs that anyone had been there. I stepped inside and checked like I was trained to. Bathroom door open, flashlight inside. Empty. Look under the desk. Nothing. Behind the filing cabinet. Nothing. No movement, no sound, no sign of someone hiding. I reached up and turned the overhead light off. Then I pulled out my phone and made a quick note in my report like I always did. Lights left on 6th floor, office 612 corrected. It was the kind of thing that happens in buildings. A timer fails. A switch gets bumped. A power surge makes something flicker on. I closed the door and walked away. I took maybe 5 steps down the hallway, and then I stopped so fast my shoes almost slid on the carpet. I smelled coffee. Not old coffee, not that stale smell you get from a break room that's been used for years. This was fresh coffee. Hot coffee. The kind of smell that makes you think of a mug in your hands. It was strong enough that it didn't make sense in an empty floor that hadn't had people on it since March. I turned around and went back to 612. I opened the door again. I flipped the overhead light back on. There was a white mug sitting on the desk by the window. It had not been there 1 minute before. I knew it hadn't. I had walked the length of the desk when I checked the room. I had looked right at that spot. Now the mug sat in the middle of the desk, close to the edge, like someone had placed it there on purpose. I didn't touch it right away. I leaned in and looked at the coffee inside. Black. No cream, no sugar. A thin line of steam rose from the surface, twisting up into the bright light. I put my fingers against the outside of the mug. It was hot. My stomach tightened in a way I couldn't explain. The only thing I could think was that somebody had to be playing a trick. The idea didn't really fit, but my brain grabbed it because it was less scary than the other possibilities. I took my phone out and snapped a photo of the mug on the desk. Then I took another one closer, so you could see the steam if you looked carefully. I wrote it down in my report with the time. Then I did something I thought was smart in the moment. I grabbed a paper napkin I kept in my pocket, wrapped it around the mug like I didn't want my fingerprints on it, and carried it downstairs to the security desk. I set it on the table under the desk lamp and stared at it for a while like it might move. Then I messaged the building manager. When he called later that morning, he sounded tired and annoyed, like I was making his life harder for no reason. He told me it was probably one of the cleaning crew who wandered onto the wrong floor and got turned around. Buildings can be confusing at night, he said. People make mistakes. I told him the 6th floor didn't have scheduled cleaning. He said he'd look into it anyway. They checked. They asked the cleaning contractors. They looked at access card logs. Nobody had been on the 6th. No swipe records, no sign of someone forcing a door, no cameras caught anyone going up. After that, the next few nights were quiet. No light, no coffee smell. Office 612 stayed dark like everything else. I started telling myself that I must have missed the mug the first time I checked. Maybe it had been there all along and my flashlight angle wasn't right. Maybe it was an old mug that somehow still held heat because I'd imagined the steam. Memory is weird when you work overnight. Your brain fills in gaps. Shadows look like shapes. It wasn't a comforting thought, the idea that I might not be paying enough attention. But it was still better than believing that an empty office was producing hot coffee out of nowhere. 9 days later, it happened again. The light under 612 came on at 2:47 in the morning, exactly like the first time. I only noticed the match because I'd written the time down before. 2:47 then, 2:47 now. Seeing the same number made my skin feel tight, like my body recognized a pattern that my mind didn't want to accept. This time, I didn't open the door right away. I stood in the hallway with my back against the wall and waited. I watched the strip of yellow light under the door and listened as hard as I could. I stayed there for maybe 5 minutes, maybe longer. Nothing changed. No shifting shadows, no footsteps, no sound of a chair moving. Just that constant hum through the vents. Finally, I walked up and opened the door. Empty office, light on. The mug was on the desk in the same spot by the window. I didn't even try to pretend I'd missed it this time. The mug looked placed, centered, like it was meant for someone to find. The steam rose the same way. I carried it downstairs again. This time I took it to the sink at the security desk, filled it with water, and left it there, thinking if it was a prank or some kind of mistake, at least I'd break the pattern. In the morning it would be cold water, no coffee, no mystery. When my shift ended, I stopped by 612 on my way out, more out of stubbornness than anything else. The mug was back on the desk. I stood in the doorway and stared at it. The room looked normal except for that one thing that didn't belong. For a moment I wondered if I had mixed it up. Maybe I'd carried a different mug down. Maybe there were 2 identical mugs and I was confusing them. I stepped closer and picked it up. There was a logo printed on it. The same insurance company that used to rent the floor. The same lettering, the same small chip on the rim that I hadn't noticed until that moment. It was the same mug. I took it back down to the security desk and did something I knew would sound ridiculous if I told anyone. But I needed to do it for my own sanity. I put the mug into my desk drawer. I shut the drawer and locked it. Then I took a photo of the closed drawer with the key in the lock, like evidence. I messaged the building manager again and attached the photos. This time, he didn't reply at all. The next night, at the start of my shift, I unlocked the drawer. It was empty. My throat went dry. I pulled the drawer out and checked behind it like it could have fallen back somehow. Nothing. I checked the floor under the desk. Nothing. I checked my trash can. Nothing. I checked the top of the desk, even though I knew it wasn't there. Nothing. I went upstairs to the 6th floor without using the elevator, because I didn't want to be trapped in a box if something happened. I took the stairs 2 at a time, my radio heavy on my shoulder, my flashlight in my hand. I walked down the 6th floor corridor to 612. The light was on. The same warm strip glowed under the door. Inside, the mug sat on the desk like it had never moved. After that, I stopped touching it. It sounds stupid now, but I made a rule for myself. Observe, log, leave. Don't interact. Don't try to prove anything. Don't try to challenge it. I didn't know what it even was, but I could feel that taking the mug, locking it away, trying to interfere, had been a mistake. For several weeks, the routine continued. Every night at 2:47, the light in office 612 came on. Every night, I went up, opened the door, saw the empty room and the mug, wrote it down, and left. I didn't drink the coffee. I didn't smell it up close anymore. I didn't touch the mug. I didn't move the chairs. I didn't open the blinds. I acted like a person who finds a snake in their yard and decides the safest plan is to keep distance and pretend it isn't there. The building manager stopped answering my messages. The cleaning crew, when I asked them directly, swore they never went to the 6th floor. They looked at me like I was accusing them of stealing. One guy told me he didn't even like going into empty spaces because it felt like walking into a tomb. I started checking the access card logs myself. We had a system that recorded entries for certain doors and elevator usage. Every morning, I would print a report or pull it up on the monitor and scan it for anything that showed someone going to 6. Nothing. No entry. No exit. No weird card use at 2:47. No records that matched what I was seeing with my own eyes. The strangest part was that I started getting used to it. That's the part I hate admitting. If it had been a scream or a shadow or blood on the wall, I would have panicked. But it was a mug, a light, a smell, something calm and almost normal, like a person quietly working late. That's how it slipped past my fear and turned into something I could almost tolerate. Then, in the middle of October, I walked into 612 and saw something that destroyed that little bit of distance I'd built. The computer was on. The monitor had been sitting on that desk since the insurance company moved out. It was a flat screen, wide, a bit old, like the kind of thing people leave behind because it isn't worth moving. The computer tower had always been under the desk, tucked back near the wall. In the first weeks after the floor went empty, I had checked the outlets, checked the cables, just to be sure there weren't any strange power issues. The computer hadn't been plugged in. It was just dead equipment, collecting dust. Now the screen was lit up, bright and active. Not a dark screen with a little no signal message. Not sleep mode. It looked like someone was using it right then. I stood there for a second with my flashlight hanging at my side, the beam pointing at the carpet. My heart was beating hard enough that I could feel it in my throat. On the monitor, a plain text editor was open. White background, black letters, a blinking cursor at the end of a line, like someone had just typed and paused. I stepped closer to read it. The document title at the top was my full name. First name, last name, spelled correctly. Not close, not kind of. Exactly the way it appeared in the company system, the way it was printed on my badge and on my employment paperwork. The line beneath it said, "Don't come back up here." That was it. No signature, no explanation, no joke. Just that sentence sitting in a bright, empty room at 2:47 in the morning. I don't know how long I stood there staring at it. Long enough that the idea of running didn't even come. I was too shocked for panic. I kept reading my own name again and again. Like if I looked at it long enough, the letters might change into something else. Finally, I backed away from the desk. I walked out of the office without turning off the light. I pulled the door shut behind me. I didn't slam it, but I closed it firmly, like a line I didn't want to cross again. Then I went downstairs to the security desk and sat down. I had 2 hours left in my shift. I didn't do rounds. I didn't check stairwells. I didn't patrol the garage. I sat in the chair and watched the camera screens like they might show something that made sense. My hands felt cold. My mouth tasted dry. Every time the elevator bell chimed on the monitor, my stomach jumped. Morning came the way it always does, slow at first, then all at once. The building woke up. The first employees came in with their coffee cups and their phones in their hands, talking about normal things, dressed for normal jobs, walking through a lobby that still smelled faintly like burnt milk. As soon as I could, I submitted a transfer request to the day shift. I wrote personal reasons. That was a lie. But I didn't know how to type the truth into a form without sounding unstable. What was I supposed to write? A blank office knows my name. A mug makes coffee at the same time every night. A computer that isn't plugged in typed a warning. A week later, the transfer was approved. During that week, I refused to go above the 5th floor. I didn't take the elevators to 6. I didn't even press the button by accident. I kept my rounds lower, found reasons to stay near the lobby and garage, where there were more cameras, more light, more normal movement. I told myself I was being professional, that I was prioritizing areas with higher traffic. But really I was avoiding the 6th floor the way you avoid a room in your house after you've had a nightmare about it. One night, late, when the building was at its quietest, I heard a car in the garage. The sound echoed the way it does down there. Tires on concrete, engine low. I watched the indicators on the security panel, the ones that showed where the elevators were. One of the elevator lights clicked on and climbed. Basement to 1, 1 to 2, then 3, 4, 5. Then it hit 6, and it stayed there. The number 6 sat on the display for several minutes, steady and bright. Nobody called the elevator back down. None of the other floors triggered. I didn't press anything. I didn't speak into the radio. I just watched that number and felt like if I moved, something would notice. Eventually, the display went dark again, like nothing had happened. When my week was over, I started daze. The building looked different in daylight, less like a maze and more like an office tower. People laughed in the lobby. The coffee shop did steady business. The 6th floor was just another floor, one that would soon have a new tenant. When you're around other people, you begin to doubt your own fear. In November, a new company moved onto the 6th floor, a consulting firm. They brought in new furniture, new computers, new plants, the usual stuff. From what I heard, they used Office 612 mostly for storage at first, stacking boxes and old equipment in there until they finished setting up the other rooms. Almost all the old furniture disappeared. The desk by the window was cleared out. The old monitor and tower were gone too, as far as I know. People worked there now. People held meetings and ordered lunch and stayed late sometimes. The normal rhythm of a business. I thought that would end it. I've been on the day shift for 6 months now. Sometimes I stay a little late to help with the handoff to the night team. Sometimes I just take my time finishing paperwork. On winter days, it gets dark early, and you can leave the building and still feel like it's nighttime. When I walk out, I pass the elevator panel in the lobby. The display is usually boring. Numbers changing, doors opening, people coming and going. But every once in a while, when the lobby is quiet and the lights reflect off the polished floor, I glance up and see the indicator sitting on 6. Just 6. No movement, no sound. Like the elevator is waiting there. I don't ask anyone about it. I don't look for a reason, and I don't go check. Story 3. I wanted a fresh start. I wanted to feel like myself again. The version of me that used to be brave and curious and a little wild. For months I'd been stuck in the same routine, the same dull work days, the same tired evenings. My life felt crowded even when I was alone. I kept thinking that if I could just step away for a while, if I could get far from screens and deadlines and all the noise in my head, maybe I'd remember how to breathe again. So I planned a long hike, a real one. Days out in the woods with nothing to do except walk, eat, sleep, and keep going. No meetings, no small talk. No office job waiting for me in the morning. The thought of going back to that life made my chest feel tight. like I was being shoved into a box. Out here, I told myself, I could finally stretch out. I could finally exist without being watched, measured, or asked to explain myself. I packed carefully, because I knew I'd be carrying everything on my back. I brought non-perishable food, cans, dried meals, protein bars, things that wouldn't rot. I packed a water purifier and filled every canteen I owned. I rolled up my sleeping bag tight and strapped it down. I added my tent, my stove, extra socks, a first aid kit, and the small tools you don't think about until you need them. I tried to keep it light, but it still felt like a whole other person hanging on my shoulders. I was missing a few important things. I didn't bring a satellite phone. I didn't bring a radio. A smarter hiker would have, but I told myself it was fine. More than fine, actually. I wanted to be alone, really alone. I wanted quiet so deep it could soak into my bones. I wanted to feel like the only person in the world, at least for a little while. I didn't realize how foolish that was until later. Before I started the hike, I went to see my parents. I acted confident, like this was just a healthy adventure and not a desperate attempt to escape my life. They tried to hide their worry, but I could see it in their faces. I showed them my route on a paper map and pointed out the main trail. I even marked the spots where I thought I might get turned around. The tricky places, the areas where the path split or the terrain got rough. I stayed with them a few days, eating my mom's food, and letting myself relax in a way I hadn't in a long time. It felt good to be in a normal house with normal sounds and lights that came on with a switch. On the day I finally left, I stopped at the park's welcome center and gave the wildlife rangers a copy of my map and my planned route. I wanted someone to know where I'd be, just in case. I waited until I felt sure I'd done the responsible things, then drove out to the farthest parking lot I could find. It was quiet out there. The kind of quiet that feels like you stepped into a different world. I got out, adjusted my pack, and slid on my sunglasses. I clipped a fanny pack around my waist for easy things like a snack, a small flashlight, and my pocket knife. I'd brought headphones and an old iPod I'd bought at a pawn shop. I knew there wouldn't be much signal out here, so streaming wasn't an option. It felt old-fashioned in a good way, like I was stepping back into a simpler time. The first stretch of trail was easy. I saw only a few people, all heading the opposite direction. They looked clean and comfortable, the kind of hikers who were ending their trip, not starting one. Some nodded at me. One person said, "Nice day for it," and kept walking. Their voices faded behind me, and soon I was alone with the sound of my boots on dirt and the wind moving through the leaves. At the first fork, I stopped and dug through my pack until I found my GPS and spare batteries. I checked my compass, too, more out of habit than trust. Then I turned left, exactly as I'd planned. The deeper I went, the more the world seemed to change. The trees felt taller. The shadows got darker. The air smelled like soil and moss and something cold hiding under the surface. By the time the sun started going down, the whole forest turned gold. Light poured through the branches in long, slanting beams. The path ahead looked like it was glowing. It was so beautiful, it almost made me forget why I'd come. I kept walking until the light finally bled away, and the woods turned into a dark wall around me. I put on my headlamp and continued. but my legs were heavy and my back ached. I pushed until I couldn't anymore, then stepped off the trail to find a flat spot. I set up my tent, slow and careful. I built a small fire pit and gathered sticks from the ground. It took some effort, but I got a fire going, and the warmth immediately made me feel safer. The night air was colder than I expected, and I stayed close to the flames as I opened my food. I set a small grill grate over the fire, placed my skillet on top, and popped open a can of SpaghettiOs with my can opener. While it heated, I put in my headphone, but I didn't even press play. I just listened to the forest. The quiet wasn't empty. It was full of tiny sounds, leaves shifting, insects buzzing, something small moving through brush somewhere far away. It was peaceful in a way my apartment never was. My everyday life always had a constant hum of stress underneath it, even when nothing was happening. Out here, the stress finally started to drain out of me. After I ate, I cleaned my skillet and packed my food away carefully. I lay back and looked up at the sky. It was sprinkled with stars so bright, they looked like little beads on black velvet. The crescent moon hung above the trees like a thin white smile. Mist drifted across the open space between branches, moving slowly, curling and breaking apart like smoke. I started thinking about my life, the way you do when there's nothing else to distract you. Who was I living for? Who did I love and who had I pushed away? Was I even the kind of person who could carry responsibility without breaking? The questions came without warning, not dramatic, just heavy. But the night was so simple and steady that even the hard thoughts didn't feel unbearable. I took a deep breath and smelled damp dirt and the clean scent that comes after rain. Even the air felt honest. I told myself I needed a life made of simple comforts, simple meals, simple sleep, simple mornings. When I was finally tired enough, I crawled into my tent, hugged my pillow close, and zipped myself into my sleeping bag. I slept hard and deep. I woke up feeling rested in a way I hadn't felt in years. The next day was more of the same. Steady walking, long stretches of silence, the occasional bird call. I felt like the forest was washing me clean. By the second night, I was tired in a good way, the kind of tired that comes from using your body the way it's meant to be used. I slept again, and for a while I thought I'd made the perfect choice. Then, 2 days into my hike, I heard chanting. At first it was faint, like my brain was trying to make sense of random sounds. I stopped walking and held my breath. The noise drifted through the trees in a slow rhythm. It didn't sound like singing. It didn't sound like people talking around a campfire. It sounded old, serious, like something meant to pull you in. I should have turned around right then. I should have walked away as fast as I could and gone back to the main trail. Instead, curiosity grabbed me by the throat. I told myself it was probably a group of hikers being weird, or some kind of private gathering. I stepped off the trail and followed the sound. The woods grew thicker. Branches scratched my arms. The ground was uneven and soft in places, and I had to fight through low plants and roots. The chanting got louder until it seemed to fill the air. Then I pushed past a final wall of brush and saw a clearing ahead. There was a bonfire so large it lit the whole space like daylight. Around it stood people in robes, crimson robes, deep red like fresh blood. They wore black hoods pulled low so I couldn't see their faces. They were arranged in a wide circle, swaying slightly as they chanted, in a steady, hypnotic pattern. For a moment, I just stood there frozen, hidden behind leaves. My mouth went dry. My skin prickled. I didn't understand what I was seeing, but I understood enough to feel afraid. Then the group shifted. They parted down the middle, creating an aisle that led straight to the fire. A line of naked men and women stepped forward. They walked calmly, like they were sleepwalking. No hesitation, no panic. They moved as if the flames were nothing more than warm light. One after another, they walked into the fire. At first, my mind refused to accept it. It felt like some kind of trick, like maybe they were stopping just short of the flames. Then I saw what fire does to skin. I saw it bubble. I saw it split. I smelled it too, and an awful smell that hit the back of my throat and made me gag. The air filled with the thick, sickening odor of burning flesh. I clapped a hand over my mouth, trying not to make a sound. My eyes burned with tears. I couldn't look away. The chanting changed, rising and falling in a new pattern, and the screams started. The people in the fire didn't scream right away, but when they did, it cut through everything. The sound wasn't human in a normal way. It was raw pain, the kind that makes your stomach twist. As the line got shorter, a pile of ash grew near the edge of the fire. The robed figures kept swaying, as calm as if they were watching rain. Something inside me snapped. Survival finally punched through curiosity. I turned away, stumbled back through the brush, and ran. I ran until my lungs felt like they were tearing. I crashed through branches, slipped on roots, and didn't stop to check if I was going the right way. I just ran back toward the trail, desperate to put distance between myself and that clearing. When I finally reached the path, I kept going. I didn't even slow down. I felt exposed, like the trees had eyes, like something was staring at my back. That night, I didn't let myself rest. I turned on my headlamp and walked through the dark until the sky started to lighten. When morning came, I was shaking with exhaustion. My legs felt numb. I found a spot near the trail and set up camp quickly, telling myself daylight would keep me safe. I ate almost nothing. My hands trembled as I held my water. I kept replaying what I'd seen, trying to make it make sense. My brain kept insisting it couldn't be real, but my nose still remembered the smell. My ears still remembered the screaming. By late afternoon, I passed out from exhaustion. I woke to the sound of drums. Thump, 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 thump. The noise didn't sound far away. It sounded like it was beating through the ground. I sat up so fast my head spun. The light outside my tent was wrong, golden and low like the sun was almost down. The air was still, no wind, no birds, nothing except my breathing and that slow, heavy rhythm. Then the drumming stopped. The silence that followed was worse. I sat there, staring at the tent fabric, listening for anything, footsteps, voices, something that would tell me I was imagining it. I told myself not to look. If I didn't look, maybe I could pretend nothing was out there. But fear has its own gravity. It pulls you toward the thing you don't want to see. I unzipped the tent slowly and peeked out. At first, I saw nothing. Just trees and my small fire pit, cold and dark. The trail was nearby, empty. I almost believed I was safe. Then I stepped out and looked around, forcing myself to breathe. A flash of red moved between the trunks. I turned my head and saw a figure in crimson, half hidden behind a tree. A black hood faced in my direction. It wasn't moving, but it didn't have to. The message was clear. I was not alone. I gasped and stumbled backward, tripping over my own tent. My heart hammered so hard, I thought it would burst. As I scrambled up, I saw another hooded figure, farther away, standing still like a marker in the woods. I didn't stop to think. I didn't stop to pack neatly. I shoved my gear into my bag in a panicked mess, grabbed what I could, and bolted down the trail. I didn't even turn on my headlamp. I ran with the last bit of daylight, terrified of what the dark would bring. Eventually, my legs failed. I stopped, bent over, and sucked air like I was drowning. I scanned the trees with my flashlight, the beam shaking in my hand. I didn't see anyone, but that didn't mean they weren't there. I didn't unpack. I didn't set up camp. I just slumped down right on the trail with my pack still on. I curled up like a trapped animal, cheek pressed against the rough fabric, and forced myself to close my eyes. When I woke, the sun was already high. My body ached from sleeping like that. I didn't eat breakfast. I just started walking again, fast. I wanted out. I wanted to reach the next safe point on my map, the place where there would be other hikers, maybe even rangers. For most of that day, nothing happened. The forest looked normal again. Birds returned. The wind picked up. I even started to feel stupid for how scared I'd been. Maybe I'd stumbled onto something I didn't understand. Maybe it was some twisted performance, some sick group playing games. Maybe the fire had been staged. Maybe my brain had filled in the worst details because I was tired. That night, I felt safe enough to stop. I didn't put up my tent. I couldn't stand the thought of being trapped inside it. Instead, I laid my sleeping bag out under the stars and kept my shoes on. I ate a quick meal and lay there staring into the dark, listening. The night stayed quiet. I almost fell into a real sleep. The next day, I let my guard down even more. The trail felt familiar again, like a normal hike. Sunlight warmed my shoulders. I even caught myself thinking that when I got home, I'd tell this story as a strange moment, something creepy but distant. Then the drums returned. Thump, thump. The sound hit my chest like a fist. I froze and spun in a circle, scanning the woods. My eyes caught a flicker of red between the trees, just for a second, like a warning flag. I ran. I didn't care how tired I was. I didn't care if I got lost. I ran down the trail as fast as I could, my pack bouncing painfully. The drums followed, steady and close, as if whoever was playing them was matching my pace. I could barely hear anything else over the pounding and my own ragged breathing. Panic made everything narrow to one goal: keep moving. Then I made a choice that felt smart in the moment and almost got me killed. I left the trail. I turned sharply and pushed into the trees, forcing my way through brush. Branches slapped my face. Rocks rolled under my feet. I stumbled down small hills and slid over loose dirt, ripping my pants and scraping my hands. The forest didn't feel like a place anymore. It felt like a trap built out of bark and shadow. After a long, painful stretch, the drums finally faded. Either I'd lost them, or they wanted me to think I had. I stopped, hunched over, and drank water. My throat was dry, and sweat ran into my eyes. I wiped my face and tried to steady my hands enough to check my GPS. The screen told me I'd drifted off my planned route, but not so far that I couldn't correct it. If I walked carefully, I could still reach the nearest safe spot in about a day. That felt like forever. But it was a number I could hold on to. I kept moving until the sky started to dim again. and my body simply refused to go farther. My legs felt like they were made of stone. I dropped to the ground, shrugged off my pack, and lay flat on my back, breathing hard. The forest around me made its usual night noises, tiny chirps, rustling leaves, but now those sounds didn't comfort me. They felt like laughter in a language I couldn't understand. I told myself I would rest for just a minute. I fell asleep. A smell dragged me awake. It was thick and sour, like fresh manure mixed with spoiled milk. It didn't belong out here. It smelled like a barn that hadn't been cleaned in months. My stomach flipped. I felt hot breath on my face, each exhale damp and heavy. I kept my eyes closed, frozen, hoping that whatever it was would lose interest if I didn't move. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. I could feel something close enough that I could almost hear it swallowing. Then a hand reached toward me. It wasn't a normal hand. The fingers felt wrong against the air, too stiff, too sure, like they'd grabbed living things before. Pure instinct took over. I swung my arm up and grabbed at the hood I sensed above me, yanking it back as I shoved the creature away. It fell, and I saw its face. Goat eyes, long horizontal pupils, a wet shine collecting in the corners. Coarse fur around the head, dark and patchy. A snout that twitched as it breathed in my fear. Its mouth worked constantly, jaw shifting as if it were chewing something invisible. The smell pouring from it was the same rot and barnyard stink that had woken me. Drums thundered again, suddenly, from all directions. The sound felt closer than ever, like the forest itself had become a drum. The creature started to rise, steadying itself like a man. It had a human body under the robe. I didn't wait to understand it. I scrambled up and ran. I left everything, my pack, my sleeping bag, my food, everything except the GPS, which I somehow still had in my hand. Without the weight of my gear, I moved faster, crashing through the trees like a terrified deer. As I ran, I kept seeing flashes of it behind me. A pale beard swinging under a goat-like jaw, its body moving with a human stride, too smooth, too practiced. Every time I caught its shape between trunks, my fear spiked so hard it made me dizzy. The smell followed in bursts like it was right behind me, then gone, then there again. I burst back onto the main trail and almost cried with relief. That relief lasted 1 second. A group of robed figures stood across the path ahead, blocking it like a wall. Crimson robes, black hoods, arms stretched out toward me, their fingers twitched as if they were eager. I tried to stop, but momentum carried me forward. I tried to push through anyway, desperate and half crazy with fear. Hands grabbed me, strong hands, not the hands of normal people. They held my arms, my shoulders, my pack strap, yanking me off balance. I fought like an animal. I twisted and kicked and clawed. In the struggle, one hood slipped back. Under it was another goat head. Black fur, rough and dirty, with strange yellow patches like sickness on its skin. Its breath hit my face and made me gag. I reacted without thinking and bit its shoulder as hard as I could. My teeth sank into something tough. It let out a sound that wasn't quite a scream and wasn't quite a bleat. Then it bit me back. Its teeth sank into my shoulder, sharp and deep. Pain exploded through me. I screamed and thrashed, and when I yanked away, it tore a piece of flesh with it. Warm blood ran down my arm. I nearly blacked out, but fear kept me standing. Somehow I broke free. I didn't know how. Maybe they didn't expect me to fight that hard. Maybe they wanted me alive and I wasn't worth the trouble. Whatever the reason, I stumbled out of their grip, clutched my bleeding shoulder, and ran. Behind me I heard goat-like laughter and the pounding of drums. The noise followed me like a curse, echoing in my skull even when I couldn't tell which direction it came from. I cried as I ran, not from sadness, but from raw terror and the shock of pain. The trail stretched ahead. According to my map, I was only a few miles from safety. An outpost, a ranger station area, a place where there would be people. I clung to that thought like it was a rope. My lungs burned, my legs shook. I forced myself to keep going. Something grabbed the back of my clothes and yanked me so hard I fell. My face hit dirt. I rolled and scrambled up, wild-eyed, and saw another hooded figure moving toward me. It came slowly, like it knew it didn't need to hurry, like it enjoyed watching me break. I dodged under its arms at the last second, brushing past its robe. The barnyard stink flooded my nose again, thick enough to taste. I gagged, but kept running, stumbling forward, half blind with panic. Then I saw it ahead. Open space, signs, a break in the deep woods, the edge of the safe area. I didn't know if it was a parking lot, or a ranger spot, or just a place where people gathered, but I saw human structures, and it felt like seeing land after drowning. I started screaming for help. I screamed until my throat tore. I waved my arms, blood smeared down my side. I didn't care how crazy I looked. I needed someone, anyone, to see me. The robe figures didn't follow me into the open. As I stumbled forward, I looked back and saw them at the tree line, half hidden by trunks and shadow. For a moment, they seemed almost unreal, like a trick of fog. Then, one by one, they stepped backward into the woods. The mist thickened between the branches, and they vanished as if they'd never been there at all. My knees gave out. I collapsed into the arms of the first person who reached me. I was shaking so badly I couldn't stand. I sobbed into their jacket and tried to speak, but the words came out broken. People crowded around asking what happened, asking if I'd been attacked by a bear or a cougar. Someone wrapped something around my shoulder and pressed hard. Another person called for help. When I finally managed to explain, it sounded insane even to me. I talked about robed cultists. I talked about people walking into a fire. I talked about goat men with human bodies. The faces around me changed as I spoke. Concern turned into confusion. Confusion turned into that careful look people get when they think you're not right in the head. They decided I'd been attacked by an animal, and that shock had messed with my memory. They looked at my thin frame and assumed I'd been starved out there, like I'd gotten lost for weeks. They didn't know I'd always been small. They didn't know how quickly fear can melt weight off a person. An ambulance took me to the hospital. Under bright lights, with doctors and nurses moving around me, the whole thing started to feel like a nightmare that shouldn't have fit in the real world. But the wound in my shoulder was real. The missing chunk of flesh was real. The bruises, the cuts, the dirt ground into my skin. Real. I begged the doctor to call my parents. When they arrived, their faces were pale and tight with panic. My mother cried the second she saw me. My father gripped my hand like he was afraid I'd vanish if he let go. I told them everything again. I told the staff again, too, hoping someone would hear the truth in my voice. No one believed me. They used words like delirious and trauma and hallucination. They asked if I'd taken drugs. They asked if I'd been drinking. They asked if I had a history of mental illness. The more I tried to insist, the more they looked at me like I was fragile glass. Lying in that hospital bed, I kept thinking about the people I'd seen walking calmly into the fire. I didn't know who they were or where they'd come from. I didn't know if they were hikers who'd gotten lost or locals who'd been pulled in somehow. I didn't know what kind of spell could make someone do that, or what kind of belief could make others chant while they burned. I didn't know if those people were dead, or if dead even meant the same thing in a forest where goat-headed things wore robes and laughed. What I did know was this: I didn't want seclusion anymore. The thing I thought I needed, total isolation, suddenly felt like the most dangerous idea in the world. I didn't want to find myself out there. I didn't want to reconnect with nature. I didn't want quiet. I wanted my home. I wanted locked doors. I wanted neighbors close enough to hear me scream. I wanted a normal job, even if it was boring, even if I complained about it. I wanted ordinary life so badly it hurt. After that, I never went back into the forest. Not for a hike, not for a weekend trip, not even for a simple walk on a wooded trail. People still told me I'd imagined it, that my mind had created monsters to explain fear. I stopped arguing with them. There was no point. But sometimes late at night, when everything is quiet and the world outside my window is still, I swear I can hear a faint rhythm somewhere far away. Thump, thump. And I remember the smell of rot and manure, the glow of the bonfire, the line of people walking willingly into flames, and the way the cultists vanished into mist the moment help arrived. I don't know if they're still out there. I only know they know I exist. Story 4. Newspapers have sat on the same street corner in the old River City for as long as anyone can remember. The stand has changed owners, the paper itself has changed names, and the street has been rebuilt more times than the locals can count. But the corner has always been there. People have bought their morning news there for over 300 years, flipping through headlines about politics, storms, fires, missing people, and murders. I grew up learning to read from those headlines. I learned what the world was like by watching strangers react to the ink in their hands. I learned how fast a crowd could form around a single, bold line of text. I also learned that when a city has been standing for centuries, it collects stories the way stone collects moss. Some stories are simply old, others are old and wrong, like something that should not have survived, but did. The strangest headline I ever saw was about the death mime murders. My name is Avalon. I'm the one who keeps death mime now. And I'll tell you how I ended up inheriting a silent kind of art that should never have been real in the first place. When I was a kid, I worked at the newspaper stand by the waterfront. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. Tourists came through in warm months, locals in the winter, and the river never stopped moving. The stand owner was a man named Strom. He was rough around the edges, always acting like he was one bad day away from yelling at everyone. But he kept the stand open, and he kept me paid. He also treated me like I belonged there, even if he complained the whole time. I was always seated while I worked. I used a wheelchair, and the stand was set up so I could reach the stacks of papers, the register, the small shelves of magazines and gum. From where I sat, I could see down the waterfront avenue, the part where street performers like to work because People had time to linger, and there was always foot traffic. That's where I first saw him. Back then, he wasn't Death Mime, at least not publicly. Back then, he was just another performer with a polished routine and a name that sounded like it was meant for posters. Pierrot the Performer, perfect parrot of pageantry. People laughed at the name, but they stayed to watch him. He dressed in crisp black and white. His face was painted with clean, smooth lines. His movements were perfect in that way that makes you forget how hard it is to control your body with that kind of precision. He didn't juggle. He didn't do card tricks. He didn't talk. He used only his hands, his posture, and the air around him. I would be working, and when I saw him start a routine, I'd roll myself a little closer to the curb to get a better look. Sometimes he performed farther down the avenue, and I'd go as far as I dared without leaving the stand completely. It wasn't only curiosity. His art pulled at my attention like gravity. When he made something invisible, I could feel it, like the air changed shape. Other people clapped because the performance was clever. I watched because I felt there was something real happening right in front of me. "Where's that kid?" Strom would snap when I rolled too far away. "They're over there," my regular customers would say, pointing me out like I was a stray cat that kept wandering off. Strom would shout that he'd fire me. He never did. Sometimes after yelling, he'd stand beside me and watch too. He didn't say much when he watched, which is how I knew he was genuinely interested. Strom didn't go quiet unless something had grabbed him. Most days, Pierrot did harmless things. He leaned on invisible walls. He pulled invisible ropes. He pretended to be trapped in a box and then escaped. Tourists laughed, took photos, tossed coins into his hat. Kids tried to copy his motions and stumbled around like baby birds. But the first time something went wrong, the first time Pierrot became something else, it happened so fast that I wasn't sure I'd seen it right. It was late afternoon, and the crowd was mostly tourists. Tourists weren't anyone's favorite customers at the stand. Some were nice, of course, but plenty were rude in casual ways, the kind that comes from treating everything like a theme park. They'd step into the street without looking. They'd toss trash where they stood. They'd haggle over the price of a newspaper like it was a souvenir. Pierrot was working the crowd, doing a routine with an invisible sphere. He acted like he was shaping it between his hands, compressing it, balancing it, testing its weight. The crowd watched with polite interest. One tourist stepped too close, laughing loudly, mimicking his movements to make their friends laugh. The tourist reached out like he was going to grab the invisible object and ruin the gag. Something in Pierrot's face changed. It wasn't dramatic, but I caught it. His eyes sharpened. His smile disappeared as if it had never existed. Then he made a quick gesture, a sharp clap-like motion like he was collapsing something. The invisible sphere wasn't a joke anymore. It snapped into place around the tourist. At first, the tourist laughed, thinking it was part of the performance. Then the tourist's expression twisted into panic. Their arms pushed outward like they were pressing against a clear surface. They twisted, trying to step away, but their body moved strangely, as if the air itself had become a reflective wall bending them. The tourist's image looked warped, and I realized with a cold shock that it wasn't an illusion. The tourist was shrinking, not falling backward, not crouching, shrinking inch by inch as though the space around them was tightening and forcing them smaller. They fought hard. Pierrot's hands moved quickly, trying to control the shape of whatever he'd made, but the tourist resisted with pure fear. For a moment, the invisible globe wavered. Then the tourist burst free, suddenly a few inches shorter than before, stumbling forward as if they'd been launched out of a tight rubber band. They ran. The crowd laughed because they thought it was part of the show, a staged moment. Pierrot stood still for a beat, face blank. Then his painted features shifted into something colder. It was subtle, but I felt it like a change in weather. He didn't bow. He didn't take coins. He simply walked away. I sat there frozen, staring after him, feeling like I'd just seen a curtain move in a room I thought was empty. I didn't understand the difference yet between a performance and a weapon. I only understood that he had shaped the air and the air had obeyed. Invisible objects, yes, but not imaginary ones. Real weight, real force, real consequences. And because I was young and stubborn and always hungry to understand things, I started practicing. At home in my room, I practiced that gesture every day. Not on people. Never on people. On ordinary objects. On the space around a cup, a book, the edge of my chair. I tried to imitate the way his hands had pinched the air, the way his fingers had curled as though holding a round surface. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't harmonious. It felt like trying to play a song after hearing it once from the street. Still, with enough repetition, something began to happen. Not every time, not on command at first. But sometimes when I made the gesture and focused hard enough, the air in front of me felt thick, like a bubble trying to form. I called it the shrink globe because I didn't have a better word. It was the first trick I ever learned, and it didn't feel like learning a trick. It felt like discovering a lever in the world that most people never even saw. I might have kept practicing if the newspaper hadn't printed a headline that turned my stomach. Lightning strikes, tourist on sunny day. It made no sense. Lightning on a clear day was rare enough, but what made my blood go cold were the details inside the story. Witnesses said there had been a mime with what looked like a skull painted on his face. The witnesses said the mime had handed the victim an invisible umbrella moments before the strike. I had seen that routine. Pierrot had done it before, and it had been beautiful in a silly way. He'd open an invisible umbrella, and suddenly rain would fall around him, even though the sky was bright. He'd hunch under it, shivering dramatically, and then act relieved when the storm passed. Sometimes you could even hear a low rumble, like distant thunder. The audience would gasp and laugh because they couldn't explain how he did it. The umbrella rod. That was what I called it in my mind because it felt like a tool, like a lever he could pull to change the weather in a small, controlled space. But now it wasn't funny. Now it was a murder weapon. I didn't have proof, not the kind a police officer could use, but I knew. I knew in the same way you know when someone is standing behind you, even if you haven't turned around yet. After that, I couldn't look at him the same way. Shrink Globe stopped being exciting. It stopped being a puzzle. I stopped practicing because it felt like touching the edge of something poisonous. I still watched him, though. I watched because I was afraid to look away. Fear is a kind of attention you don't choose. He didn't do the umbrella trick again after that death. Instead, He came out with a new routine, as if he had a rule. Never use the same method twice once it had done what he wanted. This time it started with an invisible rope. He'd mime pulling it from the air, stretching it between his hands. Then he'd act like he was preparing a rubber balloon. He'd stretch the rubber, tugging it until it seemed to resist him. Then he would inflate it, cheeks puffing, arms struggling as the balloon grew. When it got too buoyant, he'd wrap the rope around a railing or a lamppost, leaning his weight back as though the balloon was trying to lift away. The crowd would laugh at the struggle, and then he'd let go and shade his eyes, tracking the balloon floating into the sky. Nobody noticed my face wasn't smiling. I watched him perfect the timing, the exact amount of strain in his arms, the way he made it look like the balloon was just powerful enough to be believable. I watched him like you watch someone load a gun in slow motion. Soon enough, another headline appeared. Unidentified man plummets from unknown height. No one knew where the man fell from. No building cameras caught it. People said it looked like he dropped out of empty air. I knew what had happened. I could picture it clearly. Death Mime, because by then that name fit him better than Piero ever had, handed someone the balloon and let them go. He didn't need a roof or a window. He needed only the invisible force he could create. And the victim's body did the rest. I tried to tell Strom. I tried to tell him in a careful way because I didn't want to sound like a kid telling ghost stories. I told him the mime's tricks weren't tricks. I told him I'd seen something happen that didn't make sense. I told him the headlines weren't accidents. Strom snorted and shook his head. Children, he said, like the word itself was an explanation. They have such imaginations. After the balloon lift death, Death Mime moved on again. Another new routine, another crowd, another baited hook. This time, he built a safe. He acted like he was assembling an invisible box with heavy sides, grunting as if each piece had real weight. He formed a dial and pressed his ear to it, turning slowly like a safe cracker in an old movie. The audience started to drift, bored by the slow setup, and that's when Death Mime would change. A smirk would creep across his painted face. He'd attach an invisible rope and pulley above the sidewalk, then hoist the safe up with a hard pull, arms tense like he was lifting something massive. Then he'd let go. The invisible safe would crash down with a force that didn't belong to pantomime. The pavement would crack. The sound would make people jump. Some nights it even broke the surface of the walkway, leaving dents and fractures like a dropped engine block. Then Death Mime would bow and the crowd would clap because they thought it was clever stagecraft. One day, the police finally got involved, at least for the damage. They came down to the waterfront with bored expressions and that casual confidence cops sometimes wear when they think they're dealing with harmless nonsense. They walked right up to him while he was mid-performance. The crowd assumed it was part of the act. The officers played along, handing him an invisible citation, like they were joking with a street performer. Death Mime stared at the imaginary paper, then tore it up with furious motions and stomped on the invisible pieces like a child having a tantrum. People laughed. But later I found out it wasn't a joke. He really was fined. Real paperwork, real consequences. And still, he walked away as if the fine itself was just another part of his routine. Those officers were good men. They were doing their jobs, trying to keep the street safe. They didn't know what kind of person they were dealing with. They didn't know that his anger wasn't theatrical. I hated him for that. I hated him enough that I swore off magic completely, even though I still dreamed about it. I dreamed of perfect gestures, exact angles of wrists and fingers that shaped invisible things into reality. I dreamed of power that felt older than the city itself. I also remembered something else, something private and strange. The first time I ever felt truly safe, truly protected. It wasn't because of a locked door or another person standing nearby. It was because, in a moment of fear, I made a tiny gesture and felt something deep in the ground respond. Like the earth itself could hear me when I spoke in the language of motion. In that dreamlike moment, I felt a massive, ancient boulder rise beneath me, ready to shield me from anything. But it was only a feeling then, a wish. I couldn't protect anyone else. I couldn't stop death mime. And nobody believed what I was seeing. After the safe routine, death mime changed again. He never repeated a trick once it had served its purpose. That pattern became clear: practice, perfection, murder, discard, replace. The next trick was so dull that most people walked away before it ended. He arrived pushing an invisible wheelbarrow. You could hear the squeak of the wheel as he rolled it across the walkway. He pulled out an invisible shovel, then mimed lifting a heavy bag of concrete mix. He poured it into the barrow and waved away powdery dust that wasn't supposed to exist. Then he unraveled an invisible hose. He turned an invisible spigot. He began adding water and mixing, shovel scraping like it hit something thick. It went on for a long time. People got bored. They left. I stayed because by then I knew boredom was part of the trap. At the end, he left something on the ground. It looked like nothing, but I could feel it the way you can feel heat from pavement on a summer day. He placed invisible warning signs around it, then skipped away as if he'd done a harmless little construction gag. Not long after, a tourist stepped into the space and suddenly screamed. They sank, not like stepping into mud, like stepping into something that grabbed and swallowed. Their legs disappeared, then their waist. They clawed at the air, eyes wide, mouth open, begging for help that wasn't there because the crowd had moved on. It looked like quicksand. It was worse than that because it wasn't natural. It was intentional. I didn't have time to think. I wheeled toward them as fast as I could, my hands burning from the speed of the push. The tourist was already down to their chest, shaking, crying, trying to push themselves up but finding no surface. They begged me to go get help. Their voice cracked on the words. "There's no time," I said. My own voice sounded strange to me, too calm. "Just trust me. Close your eyes and feel the rope." I formed an invisible rope with my hands the way I'd seen Death Mime do it, and the air resisted like it was becoming fiber. I tied it to the railing near the water, fingers moving fast, praying that my half-learned skill would hold. Then I tossed the other end toward the tourist. "Close your eyes," I repeated. "Please, just do it." They did, because terror makes you obedient when a calm voice gives you a single, clear instruction. Their hands grabbed at the air and then tightened as if they had found something real. Their arms tensed, their shoulders lifted. They began pulling themselves up inch by inch. When they finally spilled onto solid ground, coughing and sobbing, they stared down at their empty hands. "How?" they said, crying harder now, overwhelmed by the closeness of death and the impossibility of what had saved them. I couldn't answer. I didn't even try. I rolled away, hands shaking, and I moved straight through the space where the invisible trap had been, dragging my chair wheels across it to ruin the effect. I wanted to break whatever shape Death Mime had left behind. But ruining that one patch of invisible danger didn't stop him. The newspapers kept printing stories about strange vanishings along pedestrian avenues, people missing in daylight, people disappearing in areas with no alleys, no doors, nowhere obvious to go. I read those headlines until the words blurred. I cried over them in private, bitter tears landing on cheap paper because I felt responsible in a way no one else could understand. I knew there was a killer in plain sight, and I couldn't make anyone see him. Eventually, the vanishings stopped appearing in the paper. Not because Death Mime stopped, at least not at first, but because someone finally found a story the public could believe. A reporter tracked down the tourist I had saved. The tourist was shaken, but alive, and that made all the difference. Living witnesses are harder to dismiss than rumors and bodies. One day, Strom brought a small portable TV to the stand, the kind with a built-in VCR, and he played the segment again and again for anyone who would watch. The reporter stood by the waterfront, serious-faced, while the tourist spoke into the microphone. "That kid," the tourist said, pointing toward the general area of the stand. "They saved my life. They are a hero." People at the stand turned and looked at me differently after that. Some smiled, some asked questions, some wanted to touch my shoulder like I was lucky. Strom watched the broadcast beside me with an expression I didn't recognize at first. It was solemn, heavy, like someone finally seeing a shadow they'd been ignoring. He knew the tourist was talking about me. He knew I had done something impossible. And when Strom looked down the avenue toward Death Mime after that, he didn't look amused anymore. He wasn't sure what he believed, not fully. But he knew I knew something. He knew there was more to the mime than paint and performance. Death Mime wasn't finished. Time passed. I got older. I started talking about opening my own newsstand someday. Something small, but mine. Strom told me he'd make sure I ended up on the same street, close enough that we could watch out for each other. He said it like a business plan, but I heard the other meaning underneath it. He wanted me nearby because he no longer liked the idea of me being alone. We both saw the wind tunnel trick the first time it appeared. Even describing it makes my stomach tighten. It was different from the others because it didn't look like a gag you could laugh at. It looked like the setup for an accident. Death Mime formed invisible walls with his hands, then shaped the air into a narrow passage. He leaned into it, as if testing a current. Then he acted like the wind suddenly fought back, like it grabbed him by the clothes and tried to pull him apart. The crowd enjoyed it. They thought it was a man pretending to be buffeted by air. I saw Strom's face while he watched. His jaw was set. His eyes didn't move much. He looked like a person counting exits in a room. That night, something happened to Strom. I can't describe it cleanly. I can't lay it out like a story with a beginning and an end because it was too terrible and too personal. Strom walked down the same alley each night after closing. He liked the routine. It made him feel safe. But once Strom truly saw what Death Mime was, Once he looked at him without the shield of disbelief, he wasn't safe anymore. The wind tunnel left very little of him. What I remember most is not the blood or the damage, but the feeling that the air itself had turned into a machine, like an invisible fan blade had spun up out of nothing and made a person into a lesson. My grief turned into anger so sharp it felt like a metal edge inside my chest. If I had found Death Mime that night, I think I would have tried to kill him with whatever half-formed tricks I had. Anger makes you brave in stupid ways. Instead, I had nightmares. Night after night, I dreamed of Strom being pulled into that invisible force. I woke up sweating, hearing a sound like wind in a narrow space. During the day, I read every headline looking for clues about where Death Mime had gone. I wanted a sign, an arrest, a body, a fire, anything that said the story was over. I stayed silent about who the killer was, not because Death Mime had ever threatened me directly, though once he did look at me from across the avenue and put one painted finger to his lips, telling me to hush like we shared a secret. I stayed silent because I knew no one would believe me. Strom had been the only one who came close, and now he was gone. Later I read a small story claiming a mime had gone berserk and died during police intervention. I wanted to believe it was Death Mime. I tried to force relief into my body like medicine, but something in me didn't settle. A nagging feeling stayed like an itch under the skin. The details didn't feel right. The city was full of performers. A dead mime did not automatically mean the dead mime, so I returned to the only thing I could control: practice. I went back to the first gesture I'd ever tried, the one I'd stopped because it felt dirty. Shrink globe. I practiced it in private until my hands could make the motion cleanly, until the air responded faster, until my will and my imagination stopped fighting each other and started working like a single muscle. If Death Mime was still out there, then I needed something stronger than fear. One afternoon, months later, I was crossing the street with a cup of coffee in my hand. And I'd grown to love coffee over the years, even though drinking it while moving in a wheelchair was awkward. I'd switch hands carefully, or hold the cup gently between my knees for a second to get a few pushes in. People would comment sometimes, telling me I should get a cup holder. I could, I'd say, smiling. But where's the fun in that? It was my favorite little line, a harmless joke I shared with strangers. I was mid-joke in my head when I saw him. Death Mime stood in the middle of the street, as if he had been waiting for me. His legs were bent, arms held out, posture like an old Western gunfighter about to draw. His face paint was different now, not Pierrot's clean style. The skull was back, stark and unmistakable. He knew I knew, and he wasn't going to let me roll past and keep living. People on the sidewalk slowed down to watch. They thought it was street theater, some new kind of interactive show. Phones lifted. A few laughs drifted through the air. They had no idea that if I failed, they might be watching a real death. Death Mime started by testing me. He went for the umbrella rod, his quick draw trick, snapping his hands like he was opening an umbrella in a storm. I didn't try to out-mime him. I didn't try to be elegant. I did the most practical thing I could think of. I popped the lid off my hot coffee and poured it out in front of me. The liquid vanished mid-air as if the street had swallowed it. Then, a heartbeat later, it rained down on Death Mime instead, dripping from the invisible umbrella he'd formed. His shoulders darkened as if soaked. He stood there wet and furious. Then his mouth curled, not into a friendly smile, but into something like respect mixed with hunger, like he'd been hoping I would fight back. The crowd gasped and laughed, delighted. To them it was a neat trick, the impossible kind of thing you see online later with dramatic music behind it. To me, it meant our battle had started, and only one of us was going to leave the street free. Death Mime moved slowly toward me, stretching an invisible balloon between his hands. He inflated it, cheeks puffed, arms straining, building it bigger and bigger. At the same time, he twirled the invisible rope like a lasso, preparing to hook me and lift me the way he'd lifted someone to their death. I felt anger surge, hot and wild. Strom's face flashed in my mind. The headlines. The tourists sinking into invisible cement. The quiet way Death Mime had turned performance into murder again and again. I forced the anger down because rage is sloppy, and sloppy gets you killed. I formed my hand like I was holding an invisible pistol. I loaded it with a quick thumb motion, the way I'd seen people do in old movies. Then I aimed at the balloon and made the sharpest, cleanest gesture I could. The balloon detonated in a sound that was halfway between a gunshot crack and the violent pop of bursting rubber. Death Mime flinched. The rubber in his hands went limp. He threw it down with a jerk of frustration, then nodded once as if acknowledging a move on a chessboard. Next, he began assembling the safe. He hoisted invisible panels into place, one by one, building the heavy box. He leaned in and turned the dial, ear pressed close, but he was rusty. He hadn't done this one in a long time, not since the police. His hands hesitated. The crowd murmured, confused by the pause, thinking maybe the act had lost its rhythm. Death Mime's skull-painted face turned toward me as if asking a question. Are you going to move, or are you going to let me drop this on you? Instead of finishing the dial, he jumped ahead. He pointed above my head, marking the spot where the pulley hung. Then he began hoisting the safe up, arms working like he was raising a massive weight directly over me. I stayed still. He kept glancing at me, trying to read fear, trying to predict my reaction. That was his mistake. While his attention was split between the safe and my face, I raised my hand with 2 fingers out like scissors, and I sliced. One clean motion. The invisible rope snapped. Death Mime's expression changed instantly, terror breaking through his painted mask. He lunged sideways to avoid his own falling weapon. The invisible safe slammed down hard enough to bash and dent the cobblestones. Dust and grit jumped. The force was real. The street itself looked wounded. Death Mime scrambled up, brushing himself off, then turned toward the crowd and gestured wildly at me, acting like I was the villain in the little play, like I'd sabotaged his harmless show. The crowd chuckled, enjoying the drama. I didn't look at them. I kept my focus on him because I knew what came next. The wind tunnel. The trick that had killed Strom. Death Mime began building something new. At first I thought it was the wind setup, but the motions didn't match what I remembered. He kept pointing at me like a baseball player pointing into the stands, bragging about the hit he was about to make. The crowd loved it. They leaned forward, waiting for the reveal. He wasn't building a tunnel. He was laying tracks. That detail landed in my mind like a stone. Tracks. Long, straight lines. A system, not a single object. His hands moved fast, confident as if he'd spent a long time preparing this one. He hammered invisible pieces into place, checked alignments, tightened parts I couldn't see, and kept glancing at me with excitement that felt wrong, like someone enjoying a private joke. I realized with a sick clarity that he had made this trick for me. It wasn't recycled. It wasn't one of his old favorites. He had taken time to invent something new because I had survived long enough to become interesting. Then it came alive. A loud train whistle screamed out of empty air. The ground began to tremble. Not a gentle vibration, but a deep shaking that ran up through my chair and into my bones. The crowd's laughter died as people realized this wasn't just clever. The sound was too big. The weight was too real. An invisible locomotive charged toward me at high speed. For a fraction of a second, my mind went white. There was no space to roll away fast enough. No time to turn. The force coming at me felt unstoppable, like a wall with momentum. Panic tried to rise. But something else rose first. Reflex. A déjà vu so strong it felt like I'd done this before, like my dreams had been rehearsals for this exact moment. I made the gesture, and the rock of Aegis answered. The cobblestones beneath me burst apart as if pushed from below by an ancient fist. Stone churned and cracked, opening a crater. From deep within the earth, something massive rose, lifting me and my chair upward. I felt the vibration of its power, the steady, primal strength of it. It was not delicate magic. It was protection. The locomotive hit. The collision sounded like the city itself being struck by thunder. A concussion rolled out, echoing between old buildings. The ground shook, then settled, as if the earth had taken a breath and let it out. I was above it all, perched atop an unseen boulder, my chair rattling under me, hands clenched tight on the wheels. Below, whatever death mime had built tore itself apart against my defense. Metal that wasn't visible still had weight. Momentum that wasn't visible still broke when it met something immovable. As the force faded, my stone shield lowered me back down. The boulder sank. The crater quieted, and I rolled to the edge of broken cobblestone. Death Mime stared at me. For the first time, he looked genuinely uncertain. Not angry, not playful, just still, like a performer who has forgotten what comes next in the script. He thought the fight was over because his final trick had failed. He didn't understand how over it really was. I had mastered his first mistake. Shrink low. The same method he had used on that tourist years ago, the first time I saw the mask slip. I lifted my hand and pinched the air as though I was holding him between my fingers. I positioned him in my perspective until he looked small, like a figure in the distance you could cover with your thumb. Then I formed the shape around him. A clear bubble that wasn't glass and wasn't air, something in between. I clapped once, hard, collapsing the field into a sealed orb. Death Mime was inside it. He struggled, but it held. And then it began to shrink. His movements got frantic as the sphere tightened. His body shrank with it, compressing down in the most horrifying, unnatural way until he and the invisible orb were no bigger than a snow globe you might find on a souvenir shelf. The crowd went silent. They had watched an invisible train smash into something they couldn't see. They had heard the thunder of it. They had felt the street shake. And now they watched a man who had been standing in front of me become something small enough to hold. They didn't understand what they were seeing. They only understood that it wasn't a show anymore. I reached down and picked up the little orb. It felt heavy in my hand, not because of the size, but because of what it contained. The weight of years. The weight of headlines. The weight of Strom. I turned my chair and wheeled away, leaving the ruined cobblestones behind me, leaving the stunned crowd to argue later about what was real and what wasn't. I keep death mime now. He is my eternal prisoner, sealed inside the smallest cage I could make. I believed that would be the end of it. And for now, it is enough. Story 5. Noah died about 20 years ago, during the second half of winter break in our freshman year of college. We were home from school, both of us stuck in that weird in-between stage where you're legally an adult, but still living by your parents' rules when you're under their roof. Noah's parents were out of town for their anniversary, and we figured we'd do what we always did when we had the house to ourselves: play video games, drink cheap alcohol, and pretend we were still kids. I even got my older brother to buy a bottle of vodka for us. Nothing fancy. Just enough to make the night feel like a story we'd laugh about later. We were catching up because we'd gone to different colleges, and at some point I suggested we do some urban exploration. Nearly every city in the Midwest is the same awkward size. Not rural enough to be quiet. Not urban enough to be interesting. Outside the city, there's nothing but flat roads and dark fields, and inside the city, there's just strip malls and bars you've already been to. So if you're bored, you start looking for places you're not supposed to go. Noah and I picked an abandoned grain elevator just off the interstate, within walking distance of his house. It was brutally cold that night, definitely below 10 degrees, and that's before wind chill. The kind of cold that makes your nostrils sting when you breathe and makes your fingers ache even through gloves. We bundled up: hat, gloves, scarf, heavy coat. We both brought flashlights. I slipped a fold-out knife into my coat pocket, mostly because it made me feel smarter. We walked for about 20 minutes, but the cold made it feel like an hour and a half. It wasn't just uncomfortable. It was the kind of temperature where your body starts to panic quietly, where your skin feels like it's tightening around your bones. Every gust of wind felt like a hammer driving the cold deeper. When the grain elevator finally came into view, Noah stopped short. "Jesus," he said. "You smell that?" "Smell what?" I asked. My scarf was half frozen to my face from my own breath and a running nose. I pulled my lips away from the fabric, and then the smell hit me so hard, my stomach lurched. Decay. Not an old trash smell, not a dead mouse in the wall smell. A heavy, wet rot that felt like it was filling my sinuses with something thick and live. I gagged, then immediately regretted it because the air was so cold it burned my throat. "Shit," I said, trying not to retch. "It smells like something died." Noah looked at me, eyes watering from the wind. "Do you want to keep going or no?" "Yeah," I said, forcing a laugh. "I just wish I brought a mint or something." We reached the tall chain-link fence around the property. I noticed right away that the gate wasn't locked. No chain, no padlock, nothing. For a second I wondered why, then shrugged it off. In our city, there was a decent homeless population. Abandoned places like this become shelter. People break locks. They make their own entrances. It didn't scare me the way it should have because I'd seen it before. When I was younger, my siblings and I used to smoke weed under a bridge. Sometimes we'd wander too far and spot a human shape under a pile of blankets in the dark, a silhouette that was too still. We'd back away quietly and leave it alone. So I told myself that's what this was. Just another empty building being used by someone who had nowhere else. We pushed through the gate and walked closer. The smell got worse, thicker with every step. Noah swung his flashlight to the side, and the beam landed on something near the fence. A dead animal. That's what I expected. And the relief of having a simple explanation was immediate. But the animal didn't look right. It was hairless and thin in a way that didn't match starvation alone. It looked like all the fat had been removed from it, like something had stripped it down. I guessed raccoon, but I wasn't sure. The skin looked stretched and wrong. For a split second, it felt like my blood pulled away from my limbs as if my body wanted to retreat without my permission. I told myself mange. I told myself disease. I told myself not to think too hard about it. Then we moved on. While we circled the building looking for a way inside, I shined my light into a shallow alcove. And there, on the dirt, was a familiar human shape. Blankets, tarps, worn cloth piled up like a bed. I followed the outline from the legs upward and saw long, greasy black hair sticking out near the head end. Someone was sleeping there. I didn't want to disturb them. Noah didn't either. We turned away and kept walking, quiet now without agreeing to be quiet. The kind of quiet you become when you realize you might not be alone. A few minutes later, Noah pointed his flashlight at a door on the side of the building. "I think I found a way in," he whispered. The door was ajar, knob missing. Beside it, a broken window. Dust floated inside the beam like it was suspended in time. "Hell yeah," I said. But even I could hear the hesitation in my voice. Noah heard it too. "I'll go first," he said reluctantly. He pushed his shoulder into the door. It screeched open, a horrible metal-on-metal sound that ran down my spine like a vibration. I stepped in after him. We both spun around with our flashlights, trying to understand the room. A round plastic table, a fridge in the corner, a tattered couch against the wall, a break room. For a few seconds, we just stood there, and disappointment settled in. We'd been hyping ourselves up, imagining something thrilling, and instead we'd found a sad, frozen snapshot of the last day anyone worked there. Still, I forced myself to look around, trying to squeeze excitement out of it. I walked to the couch and noticed something that made my skin prickle. A sleeve of dark gray fabric sticking out from underneath it. A blouse, maybe. The moment my curiosity shifted into something closer to intrusion, Noah's voice pulled me away. "Hey," he said, "I found another door." I looked up. He was standing near a rusty door with a large rectangular window beside it. "You're going first this time," he smirked. "You kinda bitched out with the last one." "Fuck," I groaned, trying to laugh it off while my stomach tightened. I walked to the door, dragging my feet like my body wanted to delay. I put my mittened hand on the knob and silently begged it not to move. It moved. The handle turned. The latch clicked. And when the door cracked open, the smell hit like a slap. Decay again, but stronger, concentrated. This wasn't an open yard where wind could carry it away. This was a closed space where the rot had been trapped and brewing. I gagged and turned my head. Noah made the same sound behind me. We looked at each other like we were about to back out. Then we didn't. We stepped into the room and started breathing through our mouths, pretending that would save us. Inside, I realized the window beside the door wasn't a window. It was a one-way mirror. That fact felt wrong immediately, like the building had been designed to watch people without being watched back. This room was bigger than the break room and darker. Our flashlights seemed to get swallowed before they reached the opposite wall. The air felt thick. As we moved deeper, we started to understand what this space had been. Conveyor belts ran parallel on either side. Machinery frozen in place. This was the main work floor. We vaulted over a section of belt and walked down a narrow corridor between the machine and the wall. The smell got worse. Without talking about it, we both started trying to step quietly. My heartbeat sounded too loud in my own ears. After a few minutes, my flashlight beam caught another carcass. Hairless again. Thin again. This one looked like a fox. And then a few feet beyond it, my light landed on something that made my entire body jolt, as if electricity ran through my spine. A human head. Not a whole head. The top half was gone, but the teeth and part of the cheeks held the skull upright. Frozen blood had glued it to the concrete. The eyes were still open. Whatever fluid remained had frozen them in that position, clouded over like cataracts. But even through that cloudy film, I could feel them looking at me. The scalp was stripped. A patch of waxy skin was missing, probably chewed by the fox. I didn't breathe. It felt like all the air left my body at once. Tears welled in my eyes before I even understood I was about to cry. I wanted it to be a prank, a prop, anything else. But my brain knew exactly what it was. I turned to Noah like a machine turning, slow and stiff. His face had gone pale. He swallowed, eyes wet, and whispered, We need to leave." I vaulted the conveyor belt and ran. Debris on the floor slowed me, and every step felt like I might trip and fall into something I couldn't unsee. Noah was right behind me. I was almost at the break room door when my flashlight caught something above the door frame. Bare feet. Dangling. Toes pointed downward, like their owner had been hanging there, just out of sight. Then the rest of the body dropped down. It landed in front of me with a wet thud. It was naked, skin pale and waxy like the skull we'd seen. The body was uneven, wrong in ways you notice even before your mind can label them. One thigh thinner than the other, forearms mismatched. The stomach looked like chunks of fat had been removed, leaving slack skin hanging like deflated balloons. The top half of its head was missing. Below the remaining teeth, greasy, upward-pointing strands jutted from the exposed throat. Not hair, not exactly. Like thin plant tendrils growing out of a ruined neck. My body locked. I tried to scream and nothing came out. Noah caught up behind me and I heard him inhale sharply, the sound of his breath shaking. The thing took a step toward us. Not a normal step. A lurching, bounding movement like it was being pulled forward. Noah and I finally screamed, a raw animal sound. But the body stopped and just stood there. Then it convulsed. The twitching started in the abdomen and traveled upward in waves, shaking its arms as it passed. We stood frozen, staring, reflected in the one-way mirror behind us. In the glass, our faces looked like masks of horror, as if we'd already died. The twitching stopped. and then the strands at its throat pulled inward, retreated like a bowstring being drawn. A second later, it ejected something, a wad of hair the size of a basketball, wet and matted like something pulled from a clogged drain. It flew out and hit the ground with a heavy slap. The corpse collapsed backward like a puppet with its strings cut. And the thing that came out of it launched itself past me, toward Noah. The parasite landed on Noah's chest. I saw it move like a spider, tendrils ripping through his clothes. Blood soaked his shirt instantly. He screamed, and I heard his voice start to shred as panic and pain tried to force more sound out than his body could hold. I reached for my knife, the fold-out knife. My mittens made it impossible. My hands were shaking too hard. Even if I got it out, I'd have to open the blade, and I knew I didn't have the time. I did the worst thing I've ever done in my life. I hesitated. Not because I didn't love Noah, because my brain understood in one sharp flash that I couldn't save him. I threw the folded knife at him like that could help, like metal could fight something that wasn't a normal animal. "I'm sorry," I said, voice weak and useless. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." The parasite crawled into Noah's mouth, his jaw forced open wider than it should. Tendrils sliced his cheeks down to the corners like it was making space. His screams turned muffled. Then the tendrils retreated down his throat. Noah stopped screaming, but he was still standing. I ran. I sprinted through the break room, nearly slipping on blankets and tarps that hadn't been there before. The sleeping shape in the alcove. Now I knew it wasn't sleeping, or at least I didn't want to know what it was. I burst outside, hit the gate, and it swung open so easily I almost fell forward. My arm burned where something had cut through layers of clothing. The wound went numb almost immediately from cold. I ran all the way back to Noah's house and went in through the garage. The doors didn't feel like they could close fast enough. My body was shaking violently now. The numbness in my arm started to fade and pain rose in its place. I stripped off my coat and sweatshirt and stared at the gash. The edges were flecked with thin hairs like fiberglass embedded in the skin. The smell coming off it was sickening, like something rotten lodged in a throat. I stumbled into the kitchen and opened the freezer. I found the vodka, twisted the cap off with my teeth because my hand wasn't steady enough, and poured the alcohol onto the wound. It burned like fire. I screamed and kept pouring anyway until the bottle was nearly empty. Then I called 911. 911, what's your emergency? My friend, I sobbed. My friend's dead. The grain elevator, please. After that, everything blurs. An EMT stitching my arm. Police asking questions I couldn't answer without sounding insane. Me trying to speak and failing, because how do you explain a thing made of hair that climbs inside your friend? Noah was cremated. That's the only comfort I've ever had. Whatever that thing was, whatever climbed into him, whatever wore him, should have burned with him. I went to his funeral. I couldn't look his parents in the eye. The guilt sat in me like a weight. I felt like an animal that knows it did something wrong and doesn't understand how to fix it. Over the years, I've run into Noah's parents a few times in public. His dad's eyes always looked wrong to me, the whites permanently tinged pink, like he'd cried so hard his body never recovered. The night still haunts me. I live with constant fear that I'll see bare feet dangling under the top of the doorway. that I'll find greasy hair poking out from under my bed, that I'll look down a drain and see a tendril rise and aim for my face. And every time I drive past those grain elevators, part of me wants to stop. Part of me wants to go back to check the building, to prove the thing is gone, because another part of me believes the worst possibility, that it didn't die with Noah, that it just lost one body, and it's still waiting for another. Story 5. I'll be honest, I'm kind of a couch potato. I work hard all day, and when I finally get home, all I want is to sit down, shut my brain off, and let the rest of the world handle itself for a few hours. Even the word relax feels like a joke in my house, though. Peace and quiet are basically a myth. I've got 2 kids, and I love them. I really do. But they drain whatever energy I have left before I even get my shoes off. My daughter turned 7 in January. She has ADHD, and on a normal day, she's already a whirlwind. On a bad day, she's a tornado with a face full of sugar. I've said the same thing to my wife more times than I can count. Slow and clear, like I'm reading a warning label. Do not let her have sweets. It never seems to matter. I'll walk through the front door, and there she is, bouncing off the walls like she's been plugged into an outlet. She'll be yelling, laughing, sprinting from room to room, sliding across the floor in socks, climbing the back of the couch like a jungle gym. Half the time, her face is sticky with ice cream or smeared with frosting like war paint. And my wife will be on the phone, totally calm, talking to someone from her book club like nothing is happening. Like the screaming in the background is just the sound of a normal, healthy home. My son is a different problem. If my daughter is chaos, my son is destruction. I don't mean the usual little kid stuff either. It's not just knocking over a cup of juice or throwing a tantrum in the grocery store. He likes breaking things. It's like he gets satisfaction out of damage, putting holes in drywall, snapping his sister's toys in half, ripping pages out of books and leaving them in little piles like evidence. Last week I caught him trying to microwave a fork. I walked into the kitchen at the exact moment he was pushing the buttons, staring through the glass like he was about to watch fireworks. And where was my wife? Out back on the patio, sipping a margarita in the middle of the day, reading the bell jar like she was having some kind of artsy moment and not ignoring a future arsonist. So, of course, I'm the one who disciplines him. I'm always the one. I'm the voice that raises. I'm the one who takes things away. I'm the one who has to look like the villain so someone in that house can pretend to be the fun parent. I'm the bad guy, the grouch, the mean one. We tried counseling. We tried therapy. We sat in offices with soft lighting while people nodded like they understood us. It always ended the same way, with some version of "kids will be kids" delivered in a gentle voice that somehow made me feel like I was the problem for wanting my own home to be livable. And whenever I brought up medication, even carefully, even like it was just a question, I'd get that look, the one that says I'm a monster, like I'm trying to drug my kids into being convenient. My wife and I, we're not a healthy couple. That's the truth, plain and simple. After around 10 years of marriage, things went stale in the bedroom. We stopped touching as much. We stopped laughing the way we used to. We became roommates who argued about bills and whose turn it was to do laundry. And right around that time, my wife started drinking more often. It wasn't one dramatic moment where she became an alcoholic overnight. It was gradual, the way rot is gradual. A glass of wine while she cooked. 2 glasses. A bottle, because it was a long day. Cocktails on a random Tuesday. A quick drink that turned into her swaying as she walked down the hallway. Some nights she'd lock me out of the bedroom. I'd sleep on the couch, staring at the ceiling while the TV made the living room glow faintly. In the morning, I'd find her curled up on the bathroom floor next to the toilet, hair stuck to her face, groaning about her head and mumbling that she was never going to drink again. And I hate myself for it, but those were some of the best nights I'd had in a long time. Not because I wanted her sick, not because I enjoyed it, but because the house would finally be quiet. The kids would be asleep. My wife would be too miserable to criticize me or pick a fight. Nobody would need anything from me. I could just be alone. That's when I fell in love with the sofa. I started making a routine out of it. I'd come home, survive the evening, and eventually the house would settle down. Then I'd claim my spot on the couch, like it was the only piece of territory I still owned. I'd watch whatever was on TV, half paying attention, just letting the noise wash over me until my mind went numb. Somewhere along the way, I started having a beer during those nights. One beer, usually. A small treat. A reward for dealing with what felt like an endless mess of other people's needs and problems. And honestly, if my wife could drink in the afternoon like it was self-care, I figured I'd earn one at night. That's how things were. Not good, but familiar. And then today happened. I got fired. The company was downsizing, and I was one of the names on the list. They did it the way companies always do. Short meeting, fake sympathy. A little packet of papers that's supposed to make you feel like you're being treated fairly while your life gets shoved off a cliff. The weird thing is, I didn't feel much when they told me. I should have felt panic. I should have felt anger. I should have felt something strong enough to match the size of the problem. Because I've got bills. I've got debt that feels like it will follow me to the grave. I've got 2 kids who need food and clothes and school supplies. And I've got a wife who's halfway to leaving me on a good day, and on a bad day might do it just to prove she can. I knew all of that. But on that drive home, what I felt more than anything was a deep, heavy need to sit down. I wanted to sink into the couch like it could swallow me. I wanted to crack open a bottle and let my brain float away from reality for a while. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed a truck parked beside my wife's car. It wasn't mine. For a second, I just sat there with my hands on the steering wheel, staring at it. My mind offered up excuses automatically, like it was trying to protect me. Maybe it's a friend. Maybe someone from the neighborhood needs help with something. Maybe her sister stopped by. Maybe I'm imagining the worst because I'm in a bad mood. Then I saw it more clearly, and the shape of it clicked into place. It was my brother's truck. I felt something sharp in my chest, but it didn't bloom into a full emotion. It was like my body started to react, and my mind immediately shut the door on it. I didn't have the energy for a confrontation. I didn't have the strength for yelling. I didn't even have the strength for heartbreak. All I could think was, fine, whatever, let it happen. I just want my beer. I got out of the car and walked up to the front door like I was heading into someone else's house. The second I stepped inside, both kids rushed me, screaming not happy screams. Wild, messy, overstimulated screams. The kind that hit your ears like pressure. They were completely unsupervised. My daughter was bouncing and yelling like she'd been fed pure sugar. My son was doing that thing he does where his eyes look too focused, like he's already planning something he shouldn't be. Then I saw the trail on the floor and stairs. Clothes. My wife's clothes, tossed like she couldn't be bothered to aim for a hamper, mixed in with men's work shirts and pants that I recognized immediately because I'd seen them 100 times at family barbecues and holidays. My brother's. I stood there looking at the evidence like it was just another mess I would have to clean up, like everything else in my life. The kids ran past me, one chasing the other, and a door upstairs thumped against a wall. Somewhere above, a bed squeaked in a steady rhythm. I should have snapped. I should have stormed upstairs. I should have demanded answers. Instead, I thought, oh, what the hell? Let them have their fun. All I wanted was that cold drink and my spot on the couch. I walked to the kitchen, opened the fridge, grabbed a beer, and sat down on the sofa like I was clocking in for my second job. I could still hear the kids shrieking and running around. The bed upstairs kept squeaking. My jaw clenched once, then relaxed. I stared at the TV, reached for the remote, and that's when it happened. Before I even touched a button, the TV flicked on by itself. Not a slow wake-up like a screen coming out of sleep. It snapped on, bright and sudden, lighting the room with a cold, bluish glow. At first, I thought it was some kind of timer setting, maybe a glitch. But then the screen cleared, and I felt my whole body go still. On the TV was me. Not a recording from earlier in the day, not a reflection, not some old video. It was me sitting exactly where I was sitting, framed from the chest up, facing forward. Same shirt, same tired face, same little slump in the shoulders like I was carrying a weight nobody could see. Except TV me was looking right at me with pure disgust. It wasn't an actor. It wasn't a prank. It was my own face, but harder, meaner, more awake than I felt. I leaned forward without meaning to, beer still in my hand, the cold bottle sweating against my palm. My heart started beating faster, but my mind stayed weirdly calm, like it was too tired to panic properly. TV me started talking. "Is this what you want for yourself, big guy?" he said. My own voice exactly. Same tone, same slight rasp. "This is pretty pathetic, don't you think?" I nodded before I even realized I was doing it. A small, slow nod. Like my body agreed with him, without asking my brain for permission. I took a sip of beer, eyes locked on the screen, leaning in closer like I didn't want to miss a word. TV me kept going, and his smile was wrong. Not friendly, not amused. It looked like something painted on. "These kids," he said. "You know they're not even yours, right?" My stomach tightened. My throat got hot. "You know that tramp in the other room lied to you." I didn't really know that, not for sure, but I'd suspected it in the quiet moments. The moments you never say out loud because saying them makes them real. My son did look a little like my brother if you stared too long. The thought had been a splinter in my head for years. TV me spoke like he was pulling that splinter out slowly, just to watch me bleed. "Here's what you're gonna do, champ," he said. "You know you have that shotgun in your closet, right? It's already loaded and ready to go." My hand tightened around the beer bottle. I could suddenly picture the closet without trying. The top shelf, the case, the weight of it. How I'd told myself it was for protection, for safety, for a world that sometimes felt dangerous. "If we're being honest here," TV me said, "I don't think there's any way around this." His eyes on the screen were steady, unblinking. "And if you're gonna go out," he said, voice getting louder, You're gonna go out with a bang." The word hit the room like a slap. In the background upstairs, the bed squeaked again. The kids screamed again. The house kept being the house. Then, through all of it, I heard something else. A slow creak. My bedroom door opening. Footsteps started down the hallway upstairs. Careful footsteps, like someone trying not to be heard. Each step was soft but deliberate, coming closer to the stairs, coming closer to the living room. TV Me's grin widened, like he could hear it too. "Give 'em what for, my man," he shouted, like a sports fan in the stands. "Give 'em what for." The sound from the TV didn't match the room. It felt too loud, too sharp, like it was coming from inside my skull instead of the speakers. "After all," TV Me said, quieter now, almost tender, "you know you deserve it." I felt my own mouth start to mimic his smile. It happened slowly, like a muscle remembering an expression it had practiced. I tried to stop it and couldn't. My cheeks lifted, my lips stretched, my face became something I didn't recognize. The footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. My eyes were glued to the screen, to my own face staring back at me like it owned me. A hand touched my shoulder. It was my wife's hand. Light at first, almost gentle, but it made my skin crawl anyway. I smelled her perfume mixed with alcohol and something sour underneath, like a drink that had been sitting too long. When she spoke, her voice scraped across my nerves. "Honey," she said, slow and weirdly careful, like she was talking to someone sick. "Are you feeling okay?" Her fingers tightened slightly, as if testing whether I would flinch. "Are you gonna turn the TV on?" she asked. I stared at the screen, because the TV was already on. And TV Me was still looking straight at me, smiling like he'd been waiting for her to say that exact line. Story 6. This started about a year ago. I'm not supposed to talk about it, and I'm sure that by writing it down, I'm making things worse for myself. But I don't care anymore. Whatever they think they can do to me has already happened in a different way. The version of me that cared about consequences, about rules, about staying safe. That person is gone. All I have left is this need to put the truth somewhere outside my head. Maybe these recordings will get out someday. Maybe the tapes themselves will end up in the wrong hands or the right ones, or just hands that are curious enough to press play. I don't know how it would happen. I only know one thing. The one idea that keeps tapping at my skull whenever I try to convince myself to stay quiet. Nothing stays hidden forever. Not really. Secrets rot. They leak. They spread. They find light. If you're hearing this or reading this, it means the leak finally happened. I graduated with a BA in history from a decent local university. It sounds normal when I say it. It sounds harmless. It sounds like the kind of detail you put on a resume and forget about 5 minutes later. But if I trace the path back, if I follow the chain to the first link, it starts there. A degree I chose because I genuinely loved the past. I loved how it felt to take something old and broken and figure out what it meant, to put it in order, to preserve it so it couldn't be lost. History is passion, but it's not always a clear career. Most people who study it end up teaching, or they drift into something unrelated. I wanted something closer to the material itself, something where I could work with real objects and real records. That's how I became an archivist. Right out of university, I got hired downtown as a video archivist. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, and it felt like it mattered. A lot of my work was simple on paper. Watch tapes, identify what was on them, write down key details, and log everything into a database so the footage could be found later. Most of the tapes were from the 70s. Local news segments, old commercials, community events, interviews, occasional odd home movies that ended up in collections for reasons I never learned. It wasn't ancient history. It wasn't ruined temples or medieval manuscripts. But it was still the past, still something that could vanish if no one cared. And I cared. I liked the routine. I liked the feeling that I was sorting time into labeled shelves. After a while, I realized two things. First, if I went freelance, I could work on more interesting material. Second, I could make a lot more money doing it. So I took the jump. I became a contractor. Suddenly, my projects weren't just VHS tapes. Sometimes it was historical documents. Sometimes film reels. Sometimes audio recordings. I met collectors, small museums, families that had a box of old media they wanted preserved before it decayed into nothing. It was exciting in a quiet way. I felt like I was building a life that fit me. Then I got the call. It was an afternoon like any other. I remember because I'd been doing invoices and thinking about what to cook for dinner. Nothing dramatic, nothing heavy. My phone rang. The screen showed a no-caller ID. Normally, I wouldn't answer that. I almost didn't. But I did, and I wish I could go back and let it ring until it stopped. A man spoke on the other end. His voice was rough, but controlled. Not friendly, not threatening, professional, like he'd practiced it. He told me he was calling on behalf of a company that wanted to offer me a long-term contract. He said it was the kind of project most people in my field never got near in their entire careers. He said I'd be well paid. He didn't give me his name. He didn't give me the company name. He made a point of repeating that it was confidential. Extremely confidential. The kind of confidential that wasn't just about NDAs and legal paperwork, but about not speaking at all, ever. That should have been the end of it. That should have been the moment I laughed, hung up, and blocked the number. Except there was no number, and I didn't hang up. I asked questions. Over the next few weeks, we spoke more than once, always the same. No caller ID, the same voice, the same calm tone. He gave me details, but only enough to hook me. There were collections of tapes, he said. Multiple sets. My job would be to do what I always did, watch, identify, log. But then he added one rule that felt wrong in a way I couldn't fully explain. The logs had to be handwritten, on paper. Each collection had to be kept in its own separate folder. No computer database, no digital backups, no cloud, no scanning, no photos. At first I thought maybe they were just old-fashioned. Maybe the company didn't trust digital storage. Maybe they had their own system. But the more I thought about it, the less sense it made. If they had enough money to pay me well, they had enough money to use a database. Still, the secrecy pulled at me. The scholar in me felt curious. The freelancer in me felt greedy. And the truth is, I liked the idea of being the person trusted with something rare. I liked the idea of being chosen. Looking back, I can see the first real warning sign wasn't the confidentiality or the handwritten logs. It was the way the man talked about the tapes. He never described them directly. He circled around them. He spoke as if he was reciting something he'd memorized. His politeness felt forced, like someone wearing a mask that didn't fit. Sometimes his pauses were too long. Sometimes he repeated phrases in a way that sounded almost rehearsed. It's hard to explain, but it felt like he wasn't fully comfortable speaking human language, like he'd learned how people sound on the phone by listening, and now he was copying it. Perfectly polite, perfectly flat. I asked where the tapes came from. He ignored the question. I asked who else was involved. He said, I didn't need to know. I asked where I was supposed to deliver the folders when I finished. He told me that would be handled later. The last time we spoke, I agreed. I said yes. I told him I could start as soon as I received the first collection. He said I'd have it soon. He didn't say how it would arrive. I assumed it would be mailed, maybe couriered, maybe dropped off at my building's front desk. Something normal? A few nights later, I came home from dinner with a couple of friends from university. I wasn't drunk. I'd had 2 cocktails, enough to feel a little loose, but not enough to blur reality. I unlocked my apartment, stepped inside, and walked toward the kitchen table to drop my coat. That's when I saw it. A wooden box was sitting on my table like it belonged there. Not a cardboard package, not a padded envelope. A wooden box, plain and heavy-looking, like something meant to store tools or weapons. My address was scribbled on it. There was no delivery slip, no tape, no mailing label, no sign of how it got inside my apartment. My first thought was that I'd made some mistake, that my mind was playing tricks because I'd been drinking. Then my stomach turned cold. This wasn't a hallucination. The box was real. It was right there. Someone had been inside my home. I grabbed my phone, and only then did I fully understand how trapped I was. Every call from the man had been no caller ID. There was nothing to call back, no company name to search, no address, no email, nothing. For the first time, I considered calling the police. I even opened the dial screen. But then I stared at the box, and the fear mixed with something else. Ambition, curiosity, stubborn pride. I convinced myself it was part of the job. A weird delivery method, sure, but maybe that was the point. Maybe the secrecy required it. Maybe this was how serious the project was. So I didn't call anyone. I didn't tell my friends. I didn't even text my parents. I opened the box. Inside was a tight row of VHS tapes, all unlabeled. No titles, no dates, no markings. Just black plastic spines lined up like teeth. I stood there for a long moment, listening to the quiet in my apartment. The silence felt thin, like paper stretched over a hole. I checked my locks. I checked the windows. Everything looked normal. Too normal. My office was small, just a desk, shelves, my old CRT television, and a VCR I'd kept specifically for this kind of work. I didn't bother turning on the overhead light. I don't know why. Maybe I didn't want the room to feel too real. Maybe I didn't want to see my own face clearly. I picked a tape at random, slid it into the VCR, and pressed play. That's when I noticed my hands were shaking. The screen filled with gray, degraded footage. The quality was poor, but not in the way you expect from the 70s. This looked newer. Early 90s, maybe. It had that particular feel, cheap home video grain, harsh contrast, the kind of camera movement that suggests a consumer camcorder. There was no timestamp. That struck me immediately. A lot of footage from that era had time and date burned into the corner. This didn't. Just raw video. The camera pointed into a house, an American house, or at least it looked like one to me. I've lived in Canada all my life, but there's a certain style to older American homes that you recognize from movies and TV. The layout, the shapes of the rooms, the way the stairs and hallways look. This wasn't a nice house. The walls were chipped. The paint looked swollen in places, as if moisture had gotten underneath it and never left. The hardwood floor was scratched and filthy, coated with dust and grime. Windows were boarded. Trash littered the floor, old bottles, paper, broken bits of furniture. Everything looked abandoned, but not in a clean, empty way. It looked like the house had been left behind in a hurry and then slowly rotted. The camera moved forward. I could hear voices, at least 3 or 4 people. The person holding the camera sounded like a woman, late 20s or early 30s. She was breathing hard, trying to sound steady. The others mumbled, tense, impatient. One voice, male, kept saying they should get over this quickly and get the fuck out. Another woman asked if she could wait outside. A man snapped back, "That's not what we were hired to do." I paused the tape and wrote down quick notes like I always did. It was instinct. It was my job. Even with my stomach tightening, I still reached for my notebook. I still tried to turn fear into bullet points, like that could control it. The crew kept moving through the house, flashlights cutting through dust. One man wiped a huge cobweb off a frame painting and muttered, "God damn, how long has this place been abandoned?" The image on the painting was too washed out for me to make out. Then the camera woman shushed everyone. She spoke directly into the lens as if she'd done this before. She introduced them, but parts of her words were missing. "We are team," and then a harsh beep. "Tasked with obtaining a sample of," beep, "for," beep. I rewound and played it again, thinking the audio had glitched. It hadn't. The tape had been edited. The redactions weren't something my TV was doing. Someone had bleeped out names and terms on purpose. That fact crawled under my skin. It meant I wasn't the first person to handle this footage. Someone had watched it. Someone had decided parts of it were too sensitive to leave intact. But if they'd already watched it, why hadn't they archived it themselves? Why hire me at all? The tape continued. The crew moved deeper into the house. On the surface, nothing supernatural happened right away. It was just a filthy, empty place. But the mood in the voices said otherwise. They kept reacting like they were walking toward something they didn't want to see, something they'd been paid enough to face, but not enough to accept. I remember how my body felt while I watched. My shoulders were tight. My jaw hurt from clenching. I sipped coffee that had gone cold and didn't even taste it. I kept telling myself it was probably staged, some weird art project, some underground film, some prank meant to scare me, except the fear in those voices didn't sound acted. Later in the footage, one of the men shouted that he thought he'd found it. The camera woman rushed toward him, and as she hurried down the stairs, her foot broke through a step. The wood cracked like a gunshot. The camera jolted, tumbled, and for a second the screen was just chaos. Blurred walls, a flash of ceiling, a hard impact. People shouted. Someone helped her up. She tried to keep control, tried to keep filming like it was more important than her own safety. The camera bobbed as she moved, and I realized she was crying, trying to hide it, sniffing and swallowing it back. They reached a door near the back of the house. It opened into a stairwell that led down, the basement. There was no electricity, only flashlight beams slicing into the dark. The camera pointed down the steps, and the space below looked like a black hole. The kind of darkness that seems too solid, too thick, like you could fall into it and never hit bottom. A couple of crew members went down first. The camera woman followed slowly, one step at a time. The staircase was steep, and the camera kept drifting toward the void, as if the lens itself was curious. Then it happened. A scream, sudden and sharp, exploded from below. Not a normal scream, this was panic and pain at once. A sound ripped out of someone who just realized they were about to die. The shouting turned into a mess. Footsteps pounded on the stairs. One crew member sprinted past the camera woman, rushing upward, swearing nonstop like his mouth couldn't keep up with his fear. The camera woman kept yelling, "What's wrong? What's wrong?" Over and over. No one answered her with words. There were only shrieks, broken sounds, wet, choking gasps. It was like the entire crew had lost the ability to explain what they were seeing. Like language had failed them. When she reached the basement floor, the flashlight beam swung across the room. At first, my brain couldn't process the image. It didn't make sense. It looked like distortion, like the tape had melted. Then it clicked, and my stomach dropped so hard I thought I might pass out. The floor was moving. Not like rats under a rug. Not like insects. The floor itself was alive, squirming in slow waves. And the walls, those too. The entire basement looked like a sealed box made of flesh. Hundreds of faces pressed up through the surface, packed together as if they were fused into one mass. But they weren't full faces. Not really. They were almost faces. The idea of a face formed out of skin. They had no eyes, no noses, no mouths. Smooth, blank shapes shifting and straining, as if something underneath kept trying to become human and failing. And still, the room moaned. Somehow it moaned without mouths. The sound was everywhere, a chorus of suffering that came from the walls and floor at the same time. Under it, mixed into it, were whispers, thin, sharp, urgent, like secrets being spoken into your ear by something that hates you. I heard the camera woman scream so loudly my hands jerked, and my coffee mug slipped from my fingers and shattered on the floor. I barely noticed the mess. My eyes were locked on the screen. From the flesh floor, arms rose up in different spots. They looked almost human until you noticed what was wrong. The limbs were too long, the joints bent at strange angles. The fingers were stretched like wax pulled too far. The skin was pale and shiny, like candles melting in heat. Faceless beings hauled themselves up, crawling out of the floor as if it were mud or quicksand. Their bodies didn't move like living people. They moved like something pretending, like something copying how humans crawl, but not understanding the purpose of bones. The camera dropped toward the floor, as if the person holding it had stumbled or been shoved. The image tilted, and in that sideways view I saw one of the crew members get grabbed. Long arms wrapped around him, not hugging, but hooking, locking. He screamed and tried to pull away, but he slid across the floor as if the surface had turned slick. Then the arms dragged him into the wall, not through a doorway, into the wall itself. The wall swallowed him like mud swallowing a boot. His body disappeared inch by inch. He clawed at the surface and got nothing like trying to grip water. Right before his head sank out of sight, he turned toward the camera. His face did something that haunts me more than the screaming. He looked accepting. Like in the final second, he understood there was no fighting it, like he'd seen this before in a dream. Like he knew somehow that he was only becoming part of what was already there. Then he was gone. The camera stayed on the floor. More beings crawled up. The whispers grew louder. One larger shape skidded across the frame like a spider, so close to the lens that I actually jumped out of my chair. Its limbs were wrong. Arms where legs should be, legs where arms should be. Too many fingers, too many joints. As it moved, its flesh visibly sagged and dripped, melted down onto the faceless mass below like wax runoff. Then a gloved hand entered the frame. The fingers were too long, even through the glove. The hand grabbed the camera as if it belonged to it, as if it had always owned the act of seeing. The image jerked upward, and the tape cut to black. That was the end. I sat there staring at the blank screen, my mouth open, my body rigid. I wanted to tell myself it was fake. I wanted to tell myself it was effects, costumes, editing tricks. But something about it felt too raw. The fear in the voices wasn't the fear of actors. It was the fear of people who'd realized too late that they were in the wrong place. I ran to the bathroom and threw up until my throat burned. For weeks after that, I barely slept. When I did sleep, I dreamed of walls that breathed and floors that shifted and faces pressing up under my skin from the inside. I kept hearing those whispers in my apartment, even with the TV off, even with music playing, even with my ears covered. I couldn't tell if it was real or if my brain was simply replaying the tape on a loop because it didn't know how to file it away. Then the worst realization settled into me slow and heavy. That was only the first tape. There was still more in the box. And after a few days, when I convinced myself to check again, I found something even stranger. More tapes had appeared. Not delivered to my door, not placed outside. Inside my home, as if the apartment itself was a drop point. Sometimes on the table, sometimes on a shelf. Once I found a tape sitting upright in my sink, like someone had set it there carefully. I started writing logs because I didn't know what else to do. I kept the logs handwritten, like I'd been instructed, even though I still had no clue where they were supposed to go. I had no address, no contact, no way to submit my work. And yet every time I finished a log, it stayed. It never disappeared. The pages piled on my desk in uneven stacks. Some were crumpled from shaking hands. Some had coffee stains. Some had vomit stains. I tried to throw a few away once, and later they were back on my desk, the same pages, the same handwriting, like the trash can had rejected them. The wooden boxes kept coming too. At first, I hoped they would stop if I refused to watch, but they didn't. If anything, the deliveries became more regular, more insistent. And inside each new box was a small handful of coins. Not Canadian coins. Not U.S., not British. Nothing I recognized. They weren't even close. The metal looked old, dulled in a way that didn't match modern wear. The edges were strange. The engravings didn't look like any language I knew. The symbols made my eyes slide off them, like my brain didn't want to focus too hard. I assumed it was meant to be payment, compensation, a reminder that I was working, that I was being rewarded. But what do you buy with coins that don't belong to any currency on Earth? I haven't spoken to the man again since the day I agreed to the contract. He never called back. Or maybe he did, and my phone didn't show it. Maybe my phone rang while I slept, and I didn't hear it over the whispers. Sometimes I sit at my desk and stare at the cover page I wrote for that first entry. I feel regret so deep it's almost calm. I feel fear, of course, and guilt, because I know that by watching, by logging, by continuing at all, I'm helping this process in some way. And there's another feeling, too, one I can't name cleanly. Weariness, maybe. The kind of exhaustion that isn't about sleep. The kind that comes from realizing you've stepped into something too big to understand. Something that doesn't care if you're ready. After that first tape, it became clear to me that there are truths hidden behind our normal reality. Things we don't see because we aren't meant to see them. But the problem is, once you've seen something, it doesn't stay separate. It doesn't stay out there. It becomes part of your world. It becomes part of what's possible. And if it's possible, then it's real. That thought has been suffocating me for a year. The cover page on my desk says Project ID 001 Faceless Congregation Media Type. 12 millimeters magnetic tape, heavily degraded, logged by, redacted. I look at those words and I feel sick all over again. I tell myself I have to stop. I tell myself it's destroying me. I tell myself I can still walk away if I just refuse to press play. But the tapes keep appearing, and the logs keep piling up, and the coins keep arriving like a promise or a warning. And the worst part, the part that makes me hate myself, is that I can't turn my eyes away. I still have more tapes to watch.